has been on my mind a lot, and I made this hashtag if truth mattered, that I've been kind of pushing, and I tag stuff with that if truth mattered, and that applies to what you're talking about with medicine, and it's if if the agenda, let me put it that way, if the agenda was actually truth, that we want to get to the truth of human health. That's what the medical industry is supposed to be about, right? Is human health. And if it were approached strictly from the perspective of we want to get to the truth of what's best for people, then how different do you think the medical industry would be?
Well, here's the general idea. At least this is just my opinion. If someone wanted to go to school and go to an area of science, I would recommend engineering. I'm not saying I'd recommend electrical engineering like I am, but go into engineering. Why? Because when an engineer gets a job, everything he does has to work. He has to fix all the bugs because no customer is going to buy the product unless it works. Well, unfortunately, in the medical field, a lot of times it's about who gets paid and what the insurance will allow and who's approved and things of that nature. So it turns out the United States is not doing very well, according to the rest of the world and civilized country, when it comes to medicine, except one place. One place we blow the world away in medicine: sports medicine. Why?
Right.
Because if you don't get results, that NFL quarterback's not coming back, and you can forget getting paid for that procedure.
Right.
So what you need to go to is go into an area where the results matter. Now, with the results matter, you can measure them, and therefore you end up going down to a lot better chance of finding the truth behind something. If results don't matter, you're just publishing papers and writing TV reports and making a bunch of media and running for politics and saying a bunch of words in front of people. Well, what results?
Mm-hmm.
So there becomes one of the problems.
Well, that's something that's been really interesting in kind of a tragic way. How much information that is put out there that is not, it doesn't have as its fundamental agenda behind the source of the information to put out truth, but it's skewed to prop up or to endorse a specific worldview that really isn't concerned with whether or not it's true. It's concerned with propping up this particular worldview. And I think the way education is framed, public education in the United States especially, that it's not really geared toward presenting people with the truth and educating people about how to get to the truth. It's geared toward indoctrinating the captive audience in a specific worldview, and that's atheistic evolution.
Well, that's probably one of the areas I've looked into for probably 30 years. How does a human brain learn? What about education? So let's give a definition of education, or at least the results of education, that I think everybody would agree with. Everyone would agree that education is supposed to take young people and give them a skill set, knowledge base, and things of that nature, so that when they're 30 years of age, they don't have to rely on mommy and daddy telling them how to run their life.
Right.
So education is there to tell people, here's what you need to do, learn, and grow into, whether it's discipline, whether it's skill sets, whether it's knowledge base, whether it's mathematical tables, multiplication tables, whatever it is. This will help you run your life. But you mentioned the number one problem, Norm. Let's go to it this way. I think everybody knows what an atheist is. Well, the word atheist actually comes from two Greek words. And those two Greek words are a and theos, or theon. A simply means without, and theos or theon means God. So an atheist they like to have their politics without God. They like to have their, let's go down and have my job. I don't want anybody at my job reminding me of God or creation, any of that type of stuff. I want my job without God. They want law without God. They want their newspaper without God. They want every part of their life without God. So therefore, I simply ask a simple question to people. 75 to 80% of Americans claim to be Christians. So why do they go to public schools where the only thing they're taught is atheism?
Right.
Wait a second, they're not teaching against God. I didn't say that. They teach you math without God, history without God, law without God, social studies without God, psychology without God, everything to do with marriage without God. Everything is taught from the perspective of how to run your life without God.
That's right.
And that's what people put into the public schools. They're not public schools. They're atheist schools.
That's right.
7 to
I call them
9%.
indoctrination camps.
Well, I mean, but they technically are just atheist schools. Now, the way the atheists succeeded is they said, well, you people call yourselves Christians. You don't want Catholic doctrine taught in the public schools, do you? You don't want Baptist doctrines. The Baptists will argue with the Catholics, or argue with the Presbyterians, or argue with the Pentecostals. And so they split everybody up to get them to go along with this. Instead, what got in? Well, you remove God out of everything, from every perspective you can think of. You got atheism.
Mm.
So now what does atheists do with the data that shows up that shows that God exists? I just take it out of all the textbooks. I didn't see it in mine.
And it doesn't matter whether or not true investigation brings you more to that side of the argument. They don't care. All they care about is that it's without God, like you said. That's all they care about. And even when you look at actual evidence, like you'll be presenting this evening, when you look at actual evidence, and that actual true evidence would direct you more in the viewpoint that we were specially created, we are intentionally designed. Well, they don't care if that's what the actual evidence points to. What they care about is promoting their agenda, and I think that's one of the real problems we see in our modern society, is that people just don't care what the truth is anymore. They don't have that desire to get to the truth. What they have a desire to do is to be validated. Their particular worldview, they don't care whether the evidence supports it or denies it. All they care about is validation. And so they gravitate to the place where they get the greatest validation for their worldview.
I think your comment very strongly applies to the world's most famous evolutionists, whether Stephen Jay Gould or any of these guys, okay? Mm-hmm. The people who write the textbooks about evolution and get it pushed in the textbooks, yes, those people, the ones that do the hands-on science and biology, write the biology textbooks, they know they are suppressing the truth.
Right.
The ones who do the geology, they know they are suppressing the truth because they physically have seen the evidence. It's just not a minor thing. They've seen it for too many of their years, too many of their lives. But here's the problem. The other people who are trained in each one of these sciences, they haven't seen the evidence. They haven't gone out in the field and looked at all the dinosaur bones that show the fact that dinosaurs didn't die out 65 million years ago, just because you can use your nose and you can smell the protein as they dig them up and things of that nature. Wait a second. That doesn't last for 65 million years. Mm-hmm. They know it, but other people in geology that don't dig up dinosaur bones, they don't know it. So what I'm saying is this, 90% or 98%, I don't know what the exact number is, of scientists have never seen even 1% of the evidence that you'll see tonight.
Right. Yeah, that's astonishing to me, that people in the field of getting to the truth of these various avenues of science haven't even seen, like you said, a fraction of the actual evidence that's there. And it's mind-boggling. Well, I don't want to hold up your presentation any longer. We're going to be talking about Christian evidences or apologetics this evening, the evidences that we see for the, as Jeffrey's website is very aptly titled, for the Miraculous Bible. His website is linked there in the episode notes, and I would encourage you to go and look at that. A lot of the evidence that is listed there is what Jeffrey's going to be talking about this evening. And just to get us started off, Jeffrey, give us a little background about your connection with the various sciences that supports the background for your research in these things.
Basically, what I've had to do is look for those people who are experts in different fields. And then you have to put them to the test as to whether they exaggerate the data to be in their favor, or were they some way of testing whether they're telling you the truth or not. Then you find out, okay, they're telling you the truth even when it goes against what they want the truth to be, or they just have enough evidence where it's the truth. Then I look through their research and say, okay, now what would audience be able to listen to? An awful lot of it, well, let's just face it, us engineers, us scientists, we're not very good at presenting data. We're not that good at giving speeches. We can give you some really boring equations and things of that nature. So we can put you to sleep with PowerPoint or anything. So I try to find people who have come up with illustrations and things that are so clear that you don't have to have a PhD and remember your calculus from college in order to know that you're seeing the truth. And I also try to give people, hey, go verify it for yourself. There's no reason to believe me. In fact, one of the best kept secrets of the news media. Now think about the news media. We know they're biased, right?
Yes.
One of the best kept secrets of those people is that they know that they can find a PhD, a doctor, an expert, whether it's academia or out in the field. They can find a PhD, many of them, that will believe or present whatever data the news network wants to put forth.
Right.
And so just because you got a PhD in science, it doesn't give you credibility.
Right.
You've got to give audiences information that they can verify for themselves. No matter whether I sound good tonight or don't sound good tonight, check the data out for yourself. My particular background, I have a Bachelor of Science and Electrical Engineering degree from Virginia Tech. I have spent, since 1981 over at the Space Center. I've been on since 1987 on the Kennedy Space Center side. I work at the Launch Equipment Test Facility, where we test the different launch equipment. NASA engineer will basically spend a year or two designing something that'll be used out on the launch. But they have to test it. So they bring it over to the Launch Equipment Test Facility, and I'm the data acquisition, data analysis. I'm the data guy. I'm probably the main one there. And so we take data anywhere from, we've taken data 12 million samples per second, 20 million samples per second, or whatever, 200 measurements at a time, all kinds of fancy analysis sometimes. It's a fun job, okay? These other scientists who are experts in their field, they come over and teach me what they're trying to analyze and do. I then make the computers do it and take the data, and then I do the analysis. So I'm there to help them make decisions from data. So hopefully tonight I can show you some data. And if you don't like my decision, well, go look at the data for yourself and see if you got some other decision you can make from it.
So you handle massive amounts of data input and analyze that data input to come to conclusions or produce results that are used as part of the space program.
Well, don't let me present it. I'm not the one that says, okay, NASA, this is what you need to do for this particular piece of equipment. They're the experts. They designed the equipment. But I have seen data from so many different tests that I often pick up on something they totally missed just because they're not data analysis experts and data acquisition experts. They're experts in mechanical fluid dynamics or something else. And I say, well, wait a second. If we send an ultrasonic signal down this bolt and we notice such and such length in the cable, therefore we're going to get 4 microseconds per inch for the time basis. That's why this data timing is off over here. They don't know those type things, okay? And it might have something to do with the results they're trying to make decisions from. And so what generally happens, I would say I help them a few percentage of the time to come up with things they wouldn't have thought of on their own because I've seen 20 some years of different types of tests. They're lucky if they've seen 5 years of stuff, 1 year or one test or one piece of equipment. You know, they're specialists not in data analysis, data acquisition. They're specialists in their particular field.
So I'm glad you said it that way because what we're going to be hearing tonight on Bible Q&A is the data analysis of a data analysis expert in the field of evidences for creation, for the Bible, for the existence of God, and it's really, really fascinating stuff. from the time I first encountered it when I was in school, it's been one of my favorite subjects. It really is just fascinating stuff, and I'm looking forward to your presentation tonight. Just let me know when you're ready for me to put it on the screen, and we'll get it going.
Okay, go ahead. Well, as you can tell, tonight's lesson will have something to do with dinosaurs. So let's ask a question. What is the poster child for evolution? Or let me ask it more accurately. We are not talking about evolution. Everybody believes in evolution. Evolution just means change. What we're talking about is a specific type of evolution. It's called upward evolution, not downward evolution, not the type of evolution that doesn't evolve up or down. And technically, we are speaking about upward evolution without genetic load, but we won't get into those specifics, okay? So let's just call it upward evolution. So what is the poster child for upward evolution? In fact, when you were a child, what was your first exposure to the lie of upward evolution? Well, it was dinosaurs. Where'd you get that? Well, perhaps you got it from coloring books from McDonald's Happy Meal bags, or perhaps you got it from other amazing drawing pictures, all kinds of things, okay? You can't get a meal at McDonald's without being indoctrinated in upward evolution. Well, it goes right into your brain, doesn't it? And you didn't know it. You were 5, 6 years of age, and this information just kept going in, and it seemed reasonable, and these people had PhDs. So what is the truth about dinosaurs? Let's look at this beautiful animation. Someone spent millions and millions of dollars making this movie. Just enjoy it. And then I'll ask you if you notice something. Now, you've got that whole video in your images, you've got perfectly in your memory, right? Was there any humans in there?
No.
It spent millions and millions of dollars. No humans? Well, don't be surprised. Even the adult magazines, the kids magazines, the movies, Hollywood, they never put man and dinosaurs at the same time. Yet they fill our minds and our lives with images, even making the front cover of Discovery Magazine, National Geographic. So what about these dinosaurs? Well, the largest one we know of is called Argentinosaurus, 126 feet long. Can you imagine something weighing 110 tons and walking around? Whew. There's Dr. Brad Harrop standing in the Atlanta Museum under a replica of that particular dinosaur. You see, before we can, though, describe what was going on with dinosaurs, before we can answer any questions about dinosaurs, we first have to understand the flood. And the Bible is the only source of details about the flood. The Bible is the only source for the billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. And it's one of the many evidences for a judgment by God. So if we want to study dinosaurs, let's look at the flood in the Bible. What happened to the dinosaurs? Well, has man ever seen a live dinosaur? Well, Jurassic Park would say if you saw a live dinosaur, it might look like this, right? This is the type of images they put in the movies in front of us, right? You got Tyrannosaurus Rex over there eating a street sign. Oh, we're going to be in trouble. What's National Geographic say? Look at the first sentence. No human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. Why? Well, you know, if cavemen and Tyrannosaurus Rex lived at the same time, this is what would happen to them. Well, at least that's what they keep saying. In fact, take a look at Jurassic Park. What's happened here? He's getting ready to be eaten, isn't he? He is not going to survive. Those dinosaurs are going to eat him alive. He better run. That guy's going to eat him. I got a simple question for you. Why does all these people in all these movies always go out into the wild without a rifle? Simple rifle, shoot that guy, he's dead. Tyrannosaurus Rex terrorizing a whole city? No, the army take a bazooka, blow him apart. There's no more Tyrannosaurus Rex, folks. But it would probably make for a boring movie if it was that easy. So generally when we see dinosaurs, we see this ferocious, wild creatures eating all kinds of other creatures. That's the way we see them. Rarely do we see them peaceful and looking kind of calm like this. So what do the evolutionists say about dinosaurs? Well, they say, according to their timeline, the dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. They got all kinds of theories. One of them's about what you just saw there, asteroid impacts. Okay. And they say that cavemen didn't start evolving from an ape-like creature until about 3 million years ago. Therefore, you got about 62 million years between the last of the dinosaurs and the first of the, whatever you want to call, ape-like creature turning into man. Well, what does the Bible say? Well, the Bible says that God made man and dinosaur in the same week. And by the way, he didn't make cavemen, he made Adam and Eve. So are dinosaurs mentioned in the Bible? Well, let's see. If you go over chapter 38, 39, 40, and 41 in the book of Job, God's speaking to Job, and he asks him about 60-some tough scientific questions. And Job couldn't answer a single one of these questions. When he gets up to chapter 40, he starts describing this creature to Job. Look now at Behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. So if you go to your Bible and you pull it open, you look over on the side, not the part that's inspired of God, okay, but just man's opinions. This is Behemoth is supposed to be a hippopotamus or an elephant. Okay, let's keep reading. Now, see, now his strength is in his hips and his power is in his stomach muscles. So could this be a hippo or an elephant? It would have to have some big stomach muscles. Well, the Bible tells us to put everything to the test. Norm and I do not believe the Bible just because the Bible claims to be from God. We believe it because it proves itself to be from God. We even put the Bible to the test. So let's go put this evidence to the test. Well, do elephants have a big belly? Yeah. So far, this description could fit an elephant. Do hippopotamuses have a big belly? Yeah, and I'd be running like that guy if that big belly came running after me. And did dinosaurs have a big belly? Well, yes, they did. So now let's look at the description of the tail, the very next verse. He moves his tail like a cedar? You mean a cedar tree? Yeah, a cedar tree. He moves his tail like the trunk of a cedar tree. Take a look at those people standing in front of a trunk of a cedar tree. When the Bible talks about cedars, these are very large trees, long trees swaying slowly in the wind. So I got a question for you. Does that look like a cedar tree to you? No, folks, that thing would have to be a whole lot bigger than that to be a cedar tree. Does that look like a cedar tree? 6 or 8 inch twigs sticking off the back of that guy? No, it had to be a lot bigger. But you know, the trunk of a cedar tree is a pretty good description of that long tail on some of those Apatosaurus type of dinosaurs. See, Job was told to look at Behemoth, but the Behemoth is also called the chief of the ways of the God, which means the largest land creature that God made. Perhaps it looks something like this to Job, only not green, okay? So why did the translators of the King James Version of the English Bible call it Behemoth? Why didn't they just simply call him a dinosaur? Well, you got 2 dates on the screen for you. Which one of those 2 dates do you think was the date for, let's say, the King James Version of the Bible? Well, if you know the answer, you know it's the 1611 date. Well, guess what? 200 and some years later, the word dinosaur finally came into the English language. It'd be kind of tough to put the word dinosaur into a translation before the word was even invented. So when were the dinosaurs created? That's a good question. The Bible says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And Exodus 20:11, for in 6 days the Lord made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. So what does that mean? Well, logically, that means Adam must have seen dinosaurs. So you see, Satan couldn't fool Adam and say, hey, dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. Why? Because he had to name some of them. In fact, he couldn't fool Noah because Noah had to take some of them on the ark. Now, that sounds ridiculous. How in the world would you take these big, huge creatures on that boat? We'll get to it in a minute. But over the next 4,000 years, the dinosaurs simply died off or were killed by man. And by 1809, just before we came up with the word dinosaur, people didn't know anything about these creatures on the earth. Why don't we see dinosaurs today? Well, before we can answer that question, we first have to answer what was different about this world before the flood. In other words, was the pre-flood world different? Let's look at a timeline from the Bible, okay? Average age of man. How long did man live? Average age before the flood, 912 years. Today, 70, 80 years. Back then, 912. Now, I don't know about you, but as soon as you say 912 years to someone, they automatically think, see, there's proof the Bible's just made up. It's not right. Well, let's see about that. You see, if man lived such incredibly long years, could some of the animals also have lived to unusually long ages? And if they did, how could we tell? Well, let me ask this question. What's the largest cockroach you've ever seen? Typically, about this size right here is about the largest cockroaches, or I say 3 inches to 3.5 inches, about the largest anybody sees today. In fact, the largest one we know of, the Madagascar cockroach, gets 5.5 inches. That's about it. But if the image I'm getting ready to show you, if this fossil record of this particular cockroach, if it was a palmetto type of bug, and if it was alive today, this is what it would look like. I don't think you'd want those things coming out of the bottom of your kitchen cabinet, would you? You don't call out Orchid. You call out the National Guard to go get your shotgun to shoot this guy. And if you want the smaller varieties, there's some fossil records, the 6-inch version. The 12-inch ones at the University of Arizona Museum, I couldn't get an actual picture of the 12-inch cockroach as being seen coming out from under these cabinets. What about rhinos? The biggest rhino today, if it came busting through a wall chasing you, if it was, say, 8 to 10 feet, probably only 6 or 7 feet to the shoulder blade, that guy's shoulder blade right there. If that was a height, that'd be a big rhino. But in the fossil record, when we reconstruct them from the bones, rhinoceroses like this turn out to be 18 feet just to the shoulder blade. Now, your room, just take a look up at your ceiling right now. It's probably 8, 9 feet. More than double an 8-foot ceiling just to the shoulder blade. They don't ever get that big today. Something was different before the flood. What's the biggest dragonflies you ever saw? Well, typically 4 or 5 inches across, right? You're going down the highway, 65 miles an hour, dragonfly hits on your windshield, splat, turn on your windshield wipers, wipe it off your windshield, right? Well, what if one of these guys came and hit your windshield? One of these dragonflies from the past. Well, how big were they? Well, how about a 29-inch wingspan? Well, what about this wing right there? That's a single wing from a dragonfly. That single wing is already 1.5 feet long. Well, there's your fossilized dragonfly. And today's dragonflies is the silhouette you see in the top right-hand corner. They don't ever get that big today. So if one of those hit your windshield, it knock on your windshield, sit in your lap, and ask you what you're having for lunch. You see, something was different before the flood. What about centipede, millipedes, things of that nature? 3 feet long? Yeah. They don't ever get that big today. Something was different before the flood. How many of you out there like to eat oysters? Where do oysters grow? Well, they generally grow in the ocean, right? So why are these fossilized oysters 13,000 feet above sea level? And some of them are 11 feet across. You ever go down to have an oyster and take a look down at your plate and see a 5-foot or 6-foot wide diameter oyster? No, they never get that big today, folks. Something was different before the flood. And clams, sometimes you get some good-sized clams, but I couldn't find the 10-footer, the largest one they found, but here's a fairly good-sized clam. Now, what about dinosaurs? Well, the pterosaur type of dinosaurs, the flying, okay, or such as the pterodon, most scientists who call themselves evolutionists believe that the dinosaurs were part of the reptilian type of family. In other words, just like reptiles, as long as the dinosaur was alive, it just kept growing. It doesn't reach an age of maturity like human beings. You see, we've had human beings back in the early 1900s. This gentleman here, 8'11". He ended up with a growth hormone problem. His growth hormones never shut off. In fact, that's his daddy standing next to him. So he ended up being 8'11", because his growth hormones didn't shut off. Well, dinosaurs, reptiles, if they continue to eat and lived to long ages, they would get quite large. So think about an alligator. He comes up to your front door, he's ringing on your doorbell. If you keep feeding him and feeding him and feeding him and feeding him for years and years and years, he gets a lot longer, doesn't he? Yeah. So just like dinosaurs, they could get quite large if they simply lived for longer ages. In fact, what about flesh-eating crocodiles, the flesh crocodiles? Huge. They don't ever get that big today. In fact, there's today's size inside the jaws of the ones from the dinosaur era, right? They don't ever get this big today, do they? Something was different before the flood. Even beavers, typically beavers have a maturity life. They don't keep on growing forever. But there's today's beaver skull. There's one of the larger beaver skulls we found in the fossil record. And if that beaver were reconstructed today, it'd be about that size. They don't ever get that big today. Something was unusual here. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying every dinosaur, every dragonfly, every cockroach, every beaver were these type of sizes. I'm just saying they never get this big today. It's absolutely impossible in today's environment or today's genetics. So what about dinosaurs on Noah's Ark? Okay, so what are you going to do with them? Well, if you put them on a boat that looked like that, there's no way the Bible's true, right? And yet we put these in front of kids' baby cribs and things of that nature. In fact, back in the 1800s, we had amusement rides, Noah's Ark. And yet people who called themselves Christians went to these amusement rides, which distorted the size of Noah's Ark. And everybody understands if Noah's Ark looks that small, then the Bible lied about putting animals and human beings and repopulating the world. Man has always been making fun of God's word, always been trying to get man to move away from God's word. Why? Why would you try to take 80% of the public and bend them towards your thinking when the public, if you want more customers, wouldn't you give the public what they want? Wouldn't you give them God-glorifying, Bible-believing type of evidences? No. The media and the others don't want to sell that product to the people, even though it's what the people usually wanted. Here's another one, Coney Island, New York. You see, 75% even today claim to be Christians, and yet they don't recognize these lies. Why? Same reason why we have denominations today. It's just simply biblical ignorance. They don't know their Bibles. And sometimes people who know their Bibles make mistakes and make paintings like this. Yeah. See, the real ark, well, it looked more like this. If you happen to come down to Florida sometime in Central Florida, come visit at South Seminole Church of Christ. We have this particular model sitting back in a room that you can see on display and all kinds of flyers and things to go with it. You see, the real ark was about 300 cubits long. I don't know about you, but I didn't know what a cubit was. But cubit just comes from a Hebrew word that simply means forearm, the distance from the elbow to the tip of the finger. Typically about 18 inches. Some would say 18 and a half. And then there's a Royal Egyptian cubit of 21 inches. So let's take the smallest one, 18 inches, okay? Here's Noah's Ark compared to a typical one-story house. There's a possible reconstruction. I don't even know if you can see how small those people over there are trying to get up on those stairs. Now, let me stop for just a second right here. There was a question over here on the side by Isaiah, and he says, were the days of creation 24 hours or a much longer period of time? That is an excellent question. Perhaps at the end we'll mention a few things about it, but I do have a whole lesson on just the age of the earth and that particular question. But that's another 200 PowerPoint slides. Now, back to Noah's Ark. Notice that this is a model of Noah's Ark, but this wave is supposed to be 50 feet tall. That was a huge boat. In fact, here's a poor image of Noah's Ark, but it gives you the idea when you compare it to the Titanic. 450 feet long versus Titanic, 882 feet long. This is probably a better representation of what Noah's Ark would have looked like. Now, we don't know if the door was on the top floor, like this image shows, or whether the animals went down and went up a little ramp into the second floor, or went off into long distance and went in on the second floor there. We know the Bible had 3 different floors, and we know what its dimensions were. But did you ever think about just taking out your calculator and taking those three dimensions, multiplying times each other, and seeing how many cubic feet you got? Well, there was so much room inside of Noah's Ark, 1.5 million cubic feet, that you could go down to a railroad yard and take railroad cars fully stuffed and empty 569 railroad cars of stuff inside of Noah's Ark. This image right here is not even close to 569 railroad cars, and everything would fit inside of Noah's Ark. Again, Noah's Ark was huge. So what about dinosaurs? Well, before we ask about dinosaurs on Noah's Ark, we first need to ask ourselves, the largest dinosaur that we know of, the Apatosauruses, how big were their eggs? Well, you would think, since they end up being 80, 100, 120 feet long, you think those must have been some monstrous eggs. No. As it turns out, the largest dinosaur that we know of hatched out of an egg not much bigger than a football. In fact, right here, there's an egg. When we x-ray it, guess what's inside? Embryo of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it fits in your hand. So why would God send the biggest dinosaur on the planet to go get on a Noah's Ark? Instead, he would just send babies, wouldn't he? Or as soon as the babies don't need mother's milk anymore, put them on the ark. Why do you bring them? Well, they're smaller. Okay. They weigh a lot less. Now, there's my favorite reason. If I was Noah and that family, my favorite reason is they eat a lot less. Why? Why is that my favorite? Because generally when animals eat something, a short period of time later, something else comes out. There'd be a lot less of that stink around there for the small animals. They sleep a lot more. They're a lot tougher. But you know, the number one reason, they're going to produce more offspring when they get off the ark after the flood. So you take not the big bull elephant right here, not mama. You take the young elephant. You put them on Noah's Ark. Perhaps the dinosaurs look something of this size. And you only had to take 2 of every sort. 7 of the clean, but there wasn't too many of the clean animals. 2 of the other sorts, okay? Male and female. And it was after their kind. It doesn't say after their species. And notice that the last sentence here, wherein is the breath of life. And we're told specifically in Genesis 7:22 that all in whose nostrils was the breath of life and all that was on dry land, they perished in the flood. So you had to have nostrils and live on dry land to be killed in the flood, or at least all of you to be killed. I'm sure a lot of others also got killed, but all the ones that lived on dry land and had nostrils, they're dead, unless they went on the ark. So technically speaking, that means insects didn't have to go on the ark, because technically speaking, insects would survive on floating log mats and everything else that got ripped up by the flood. And they breathe through their skin anyways. It's what's called sphericals, not nostrils. So how many dogs did Noah have to put on Noah's Ark? Did he take 2 bulldogs, 2 basset hounds, 2 chihuahuas, 2 Dalmatians? No. All he had to do is take 2 of the wild kind, genetically wild kind. Perhaps they were more closely related to today's coyote or wolf. And then from that genetics, all the other different varieties of dogs could be breeded over the next few thousand years. Same thing with horses. Whatever the wild genetic kind that had all the information and the genes needed for which the others could then eventually come from over the next few thousand years, that's all you need. But what did the skeptics say? Well, Noah can't fit millions of animals on that ark. Well, how many were there? There's only about 8,000 different kinds. And that's, some say, even less than that. So that means about 16,000 animals plus 7 each one of the clean ones, so maybe another few hundred, few thousand. He only had to take land animals, no fish. Only those with nostrils, didn't have to take the bugs. He could bring babies or young adults, and 2 of each kind, not of each species. So the next question we ought to ask ourselves is this: how come every evolutionary scientist on the planet, technically that's a contradiction in terms, as soon as they think they're believing in evolution, they've stopped doing science, but never mind, okay. Every upward evolutionary scientist on the planet denies any evidence for a worldwide flood. Well, How come when we look at the legends of the past, what do they say? Was there a worldwide flood? How would legends get started? Let's ask ourselves this question. How would we test this idea of legends? Well, how did flood legends get started if the Bible is correct? You'll notice right here, Noah. Well, Noah lived so long, he could have talked to his grandson called Arphaxad. Okay, so let's take this image right here, and let's pretend that this is Arphaxad in Grandpa Noah's lap. And pretend like overall in the background you're there, you see Noah's Ark. It's all kind of falling apart. Maybe they took pieces of wood and built their houses out of it, things of that nature. So Arphaxad is looking at Grandpa and saying, Grandpa, how come we're the only people in the world? Or does nobody like us? They just don't come visit? And you know that Grandpa Noah would have told Arphaxad about God's judgment on the entire world and how that only 8 souls were saved on the ark. And he would show him the ark and explain everything else. Well, Arphaxad, when he grows up years later, he's going to have children. And he would tell his children, your great-grandpa Noah lived before the flood and said. And so here's how the legends would get started, right? And you know, you probably played that game when you were kids. You pass down by word of mouth. And by the time it gets to the end, there's a little bit of the same truth there as the story that came at the beginning, but it's been distorted a lot, okay? So let's look at flood legends. Well, if we take a look at this timeline, we'll take a look at Adam right there. Did you ever realize if you use your Bible and you add up all the times, it really makes for an interesting story. Adam lived so long, he literally, at the beginning of creation, he lived 930 years, which means he died before the flood, which is 1656 years later. But look at this. He lived so long, he could have spoken to Noah's granddaddy, Methuselah. In fact, Methuselah had been a few hundred years old by the time Adam died. Adam could have, I'm not saying he did, but he could have literally spoken to Noah's son, Shem. And Shem lived so long, he could have spoken to Abraham's son, Isaac. So you see, it wouldn't take too many generations to pass down by word of mouth the idea of the creation in the Garden of Eden or the flood. So flood legends, it turns out, every single continent on which man lives has its own flood legends. Over 270 flood stories. Here's a chart. Look at what they agree on. They don't all agree on everything. About all of them agree destruction by water, humans were saved, animals saved, universal destruction, landing on a mountain. Some of them mention birds being sent out, divine favor on the saved, man's transgressions, all kinds of things. Take a look at the countries at the top. They agree on a lot of that, don't they? Sure sounds like it's got a thread of truth in there, doesn't it? Let me give you an example. Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it talks about a worldwide flood in tablet number 11. There's a particular image of it. In fact, we found 33 separate tablets that talk about a gigantic flood, and 30 of them mention an ark. Think about that. 33 mention a worldwide flood that all your professors in college deny happening, and 30 tablets even mention an ark, which they definitely deny. 28 mention an ark came to rest on a mountain. 29 state the birds were sent out. 30 mention the favor for the survivors, and most of them mention an act of worship as the survivors left the ark. Such as the Will Blundell prism found in 1923. This was written supposedly about 100 years before Abraham. And it begins with 8 kings who ruled before the world. And at the end, has a list of kings that says the flood swept over the earth. And the record kind of parallels the genealogies in Genesis 5 and Genesis 11. But notice this. It has stated that the people who lived before the flood had long lifespans, just like those found in Genesis. Or what about the Ebla tablets, over 17,000 clay tablets in northern Syria? They dated about 2400 BC, might be a little bit stretched there, but anyways. Contain a creation account and a flood account. It even mentions Sodom and Gomorrah, which, again, these upward evolutionists who dominate the fields of archaeology, they completely denied that Sodom and Gomorrah existed. They were just mythical cities. They're mentioned on these tablets from thousands of years ago. What about the Hawaii legend? As you would notice, a Hawaii legend might have the boat be a little bit different in its construction. Long after the death of Kilihona, I guess that's Adam, the first man, the world became a wicked, terrible place to live. There was one good man left. His name was Nu'u. I guess that's their name for Noah. He made a great canoe with a house on it and filled it with animals. The water came up over all the earth and killed all the people. Only Nu'u and his family were saved. Or what about the Chinese legend? Well, it tells the story of Fuhi, who the Chinese consider the father of their civilization. Their history now, okay, records that Fuhi, his wife, 3 sons and 3 daughters. Now, wait a second. How many people's that? Fuhi, his wife, 3 sons, 3 daughters. That's 8 people. Just like the Bible says. 8 people were saved by water. The like figure whereunto baptism does also now save you. Yeah, he even got the number of people correct. They escaped a great flood. He and his family were the only people alive on earth, and they repopulated the world. What about the Toltec Indians? They even told you how long the First World lasted. They estimated 1,716 years. Wait a second. Remember that timeline we had right there? How old was the earth from creation? 1,656 years, according to the Bible. I tell you, for a legend to only be off by 60 years, that's pretty good. In Genesis chapter 8, it says the ark rested in the 7th month upon the mountains of Ararat. Mountains. Now, Dr. John Morris, he happens to have a PhD in geology. He and others like him have gone over looking for evidence for Noah's Ark. And basically, wood just doesn't last for 4,000 years. So it's not going to survive unless it's immediately put under ice and snow and things of that nature thousands of years ago. There's been an awful lot of movies and documentaries trying to say there has been evidence there, but he has not been able to verify it at all. And I would trust his studies more than all these TV programs that you might see. But where is Mount Ararat? Well, right there it is. It's very close to the border between 3 different countries. And there's you got Google Maps. And if we look at it there, well, let me back up just a second, give you a little bit. Try that again. Okay. We'll let it pause and then go in. So there we go. I'll let Google Earth zoom in for us. Now we've seen Mount Ararat, and the one to the right is called Lesser Ararat. So at the end of the flood, as the water started to go down, perhaps it looked something like this. And if you looked at it from the top, perhaps there was Noah's Ark sitting on the top of the mountain. We don't know. Okay. Now, some people today will claim, yeah, okay, there was a flood, but it was just local. Mesopotamia Valley. Yeah, local floods. No, folks. Local flood stories about as truthful as this ridiculous image right here. And this is the local flood they talk about, Mesopotamia Valley, Black Sea. I think it's best illustrated by a simple cartoon. This is a father speaking with his son. And the father says, look at that beautiful rainbow. It's a promise from God that he'll never again flood the entire earth as he did in Noah's day. And the son says back, well, my Christian college professor said that Noah's flood didn't cover the entire earth. He told you it was a localized flood? Well, that's what he said. So he believes that God promised to never again send a localized flood. Now look where they're sitting, folks. They're sitting on top of a roof of a house that's in the middle of a localized flood. No, the rainbow says there's never going to be a worldwide flood again. Unfortunately, a lot of colleges that call themselves Christian colleges teach lies, such as this illustration shows. Well, if it's a local flood, let's just simply ask ourselves a simple question. Why in the world would you build an ark? You're given about 100 years to build the ark, so why don't you just move? You'll go a long ways in 100 years. Say, hey, God, you want me to build this ark? No, I'll just move over to Siberia somewhere. No. Now, what happened to the dinosaurs? That was the lesson that was a question we started this lesson with. Well, technically speaking, we've now ended part 1. Now let's get into the meat of this lesson. What really happened to those dinosaurs? Well, simple question, simple answer. They died in a big judgment by God, unless they got onto Noah's ark. But before we understand this destruction of the entire world and how dinosaurs get off the ark and survive afterwards, things of that nature, let's see, where is the longest mountain chain in the entire world? Well, part of it, you know about the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, that part of the mountain chain on the bottom of the ocean floor that goes between North America and South America and then Europe and Africa. Yeah. The longest chain of the mountains, this Mid-Atlantic Ridge. But that Mid-Atlantic Ridge keeps on going, and it ends up going for 40,000 miles. If you took the water off the planet, the longest mountain chain is 40,000 miles long. This illustration here might make it easier for you to see it. I want you to manage, Genesis 7:11 says, all the fountains of great deep broke open, cleaved open. So at the bottom of the ocean floor cracked open along this huge seam, like a baseball seam, all on the same day, and spewed water, hot steam water, things of that nature, out of this crack, shooting up into the air, and continental plates start moving apart. Wow, 40,000 mile long crack. Just imagine what that must have looked like. Let's illustrate it this way. Your Mid-Atlantic Ridge right there, when the South America and Africa were closer together, as that cracked and those plates, South America, started moving away from Africa, if you had two animals of the same kind, and one lived on one side of the crack, on the other side of the crack, they'd run away from each other, trying to get away from this flood coming, right? Well, you can't outrun judgment by God, so they're going to get killed. They're going to get buried. Now, if they're under the right conditions, they will then be fossilized. Otherwise, their bones will probably survive. And then thousands of years later, we dig up the bones. And by the way, we do find fossils of similar creatures on South America and on Africa. So it does seem to fit. But every time you see fossils in the ground, you should be saying to yourself, no. Most likely, they were laid down by a worldwide flood, because 90% or more of all the fossils in the world were laid down by a worldwide flood. And that should remind them you can't outrun the judgment of God. So 7:11, Genesis 7:11, the bottom of the ocean floor cracked open, cleaved open. That hot magma hits ocean water, which then shoots vapor shooting up into the atmosphere. All the rain you want for 40 days and 40 nights. Not a problem. Let me show you an illustration done by the evolutionists. Now, this illustration, they would say, takes millions and millions of years. But imagine the bottom of the ocean floor right there, cracking open, the hot magma, forming new ocean bottom rock. And that rock, new formed rock, pushes the older rock to subduct underneath another continent that you saw right there. And it goes down into the mantle. Well, if this only goes a couple inches, a few centimeters per year, then as that old cold ocean bottom goes down into the mantle, over millions of years, it would all be the same temperature as the rest of the mantle. But if it only happened about 4,000 some years ago, some of that colder bottom ocean continental plate would still have a little bit cooler temperature than the mantle temperature. Well, guess what? We've now measured and found these colder pockets down in the mantle. No evolutionist has any idea how that material can stay that cold of a temperature or be that much different in temperature than the rest of the mantle. That's because they deny a worldwide flood. You see, I personally like this particular video. I think their door is a little too small. But if you're inside the ark, and then here's outside the ark, if the bottom of the ocean floor cracks open, and I'd assume this crack was a whole lot bigger than this, but you get the idea. And if you were on that boat out there, you're not surviving. Now notice the clock on the bottom left is spinning a lot faster, so you don't have to sit there and wait for a few hours for this to cover the entire Earth. That huge wall of water coming at you is many miles offshore. And if you heard the noise from that coming at you and you looked out the window like she's getting ready to do, where would you run? There's no place to go. You cannot outrun the judgment of God. Judgment by water. So what happened to the dinosaurs? Well, the ones that went on the ark, well, they got off the ark. But this world was totally different, a hostile climate, and probably many of the animals and the dinosaurs, a lot of them would have died out simply due to the harsh climate in a few hundred years. And technically speaking, Noah's flood would have caused an ice age, but that's a whole other subject, okay? Remember the average age before the flood of human beings was 912? Well, within just a couple generations, the average age is down to about 400. A couple more generations, you're down to 200. And a couple more generations, you're down to 100. It didn't take long. So what about dinosaurs and man? Well, I wouldn't want him around today. But remember that we started off with this National Geographic GeoGuide? What I didn't mention to you is that very first sentence over there, no human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. At the bottom of this page, this GeoGuide, is a picture of a museum. It's looking down on the floor of the museum. And what's on the floor is a bunch of children in sleeping bags. And this GeoGuide is meant for children. And it says right at the bottom of the picture, use this GeoGuide page to help capture the interest of young readers and stimulate discussion with them. Well, what type of discussion would you stimulate? Well, the first sentence, no human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. Why do they want to do this? In fact, this evolutionist, this upward evolutionist, Dr. Philip Ketcher, he hates creation, okay? He wrote a book, The Case Against Creationism. And he said if you could find solid evidence for the coexistence of dinosaurs and humans, it would shake the foundations of evolutionary theory. You mean tonight's lesson can actually shake the whole foundation of evolutionary theory? Yeah. Let's shake the evolutionary theory, okay? Now, what I'm trying to illustrate here is this. You've got a conclusion at the bottom. 65 million years ago, okay? The evolutionists say man has never seen a live dinosaur. Well, what type of evidence would it take to make that conclusion wrong? Well, in order for that conclusion to be wrong, well, all we have to do is find evidence in one single area. So let's pretend like that's a rope. And at 3 different locations, this rope is tied to no fossils, and then it's tied up to no archaeology, and it's tied up to no history legends. You have to have 0 evidences from history, you have to have 0 evidence from archaeology, you have to have 0 evidence from the fossil record in order to support and hold up that conclusion at the bottom. Let's see how well evolution does. Let's look at history or legends. No human being seen a live dinosaur? Oh yeah. Dinosaurs are mentioned as giants throughout all history. The word dinosaur was invented by Sir Richard Owen in 1842. Before that, long-necked, long-tailed creatures, dragons. Legends of people killing dragons. Now, don't get me wrong. Images like this are probably an exaggeration. I don't think the neck would work quite like that, okay? So just because someone exaggerates the length of a neck or its vertebrae or things of that nature doesn't mean there was no long-necked, long-tailed creatures. In fact, take a look at this one. Evolutionists found this in 2003. Even they called it Dracorex, Dragon King. Why? Because it looked more like a dragon, okay? There's the actual skull. What about Gilgamesh? Or there's a legend, slaying a dragon. And there's a tablet the Epic of Gilgamesh is found on. What about Ziegfeld slaying the dragon Fifnir? Well, that's what the Norse legend says. What about the city of Nuremberg, France? They renamed the city because of a dragon slain there, and then they gave you a description of it, and the description only fits like a triceratops. Huh. Chinese legend tells a famous Chinese man named Yu, and after the Great Flood, he surveyed the land of China, divided in sections, built channels, drained the water off the sea, and helped make the land livable again. Many snakes and dragons were driven from the marshlands. Maybe his wife didn't want the kids growing up next to Tyrannosaurus Rex, okay? The Bible even mentions dragons. Now, a lot of modern translations like to take it out. Oh, no, we can't have that. No, dragons are mentioned in the Bible 20 to 35 times. Remember the tail like a cedar tree? Yeah. Herodotus, considered a Greek historian in the 5th century BC, he talks about flying reptiles. Flying reptiles? Yeah, perhaps like a Dimorphodon. What about the Jewish historian Josephus? Well, he wrote about these flying reptiles, flying serpents. What about Alexander the Great? Was he a real historical person? Well, he said when he was going over to conquer India in about 326 BC, his soldiers were scared by great dragons that lived in caves. Do you think his soldiers got scared by a 3-foot-tall dinosaur sticking his head out of a cave? No. Now, I'm not saying they're 100 feet long like they used to be before the flood, but they had to at least be big enough to scare his soldiers. He wrote about them. Let's look at that timeline again. Evolutionist timeline. Where does 326 BC, Alexander the Great, where does it fit on the Bible timeline? Fits perfectly, doesn't it? No problem. Where does it fit on the evolutionist timeline? Well, wait a second. I thought the evolutionists said the dinosaur died out over there. That's what they said. So the evidence does not fit their theory. What about this Roman mosaic? Look at the date on it. 2nd century AD. That's some long-necked creatures, all right. Well, 2nd century AD fits the Bible timeline. Bible has no problem with that. But the 2nd century AD on the evolutionist timeline is all the way over on the right. But the evolutionists say, nope, that's impossible. St. George slaying a dragon in 275 AD. 900 AD, Irish writer described this creature with nails on its tail, a head similar to a horse, a stegosaurus. Yeah. Here's a website you can go to about more information on dinosaurs. There's our particular website, Truth About Dinosaurs, the name that Norm helped me come up with. And what about Viking ships? They put a long-necked creature on the head of their ships, a dragon head, about 1000 AD. Yeah. What's that doing there? What about this? The Unexplained Mysteries. Obviously, it's written by an evolutionist because he's the only person who could call it unexplained. If you believe the Bible, it's easily explained. But it's unexplained to those who want to deny these type of evidences. You see, the 10th century AD easily fits the Bible timeline. It does not fit the evolutionist timeline. What about Marco Polo? People believe his history about China, right? And yet he said that the emperor raised dragons to pull chariots in his parades. Perhaps it looks something like this. We don't know. They even had a royal dragon feeder. They even took the blood from these dragons and used them in their medicines. Wow. He even described these creatures. But unfortunately, if you get Marco Polo's book today, the editor tries to explain away what Marco Polo wrote. Yeah. He tries to call, well, it really wasn't. It was a crocodile. No. Polo describes the creature so well, it absolutely cannot fit a crocodile. And you can stop this presentation anytime you want when you play it back and read all this, and it'll give you the details. Okay, so now let's look at this. The conclusion at the bottom, that man has never seen a live dinosaur, is it supported by having zero evidence from history or legends? Well, no, we've seen plenty. It breaks that link easily. The Bible talked about them. We got Alexander the Great. We got the Roman mosaic. We got Marco Polo. What does that do to that rope right there holding up that conclusion? It breaks that rope and shows that 65 million years ago is a lie. Man saw live dinosaurs. Let's look at the fossil record. According to these upward evolutionists, mammals didn't come along until after the dinosaurs. In fact, they said the only type of mammals that possibly existed during the time or last parts of the dinosaur were small mouse-sized mammals. Well, how come we found a small dinosaur in the stomach of a mammal? Doesn't quite fit their theory, does it? But anyways. What about this? Helicopter got down to a Tyrannosaurus rex thigh and had to lift the thigh out there. It couldn't get it up. So they had to break the thigh in half and pull it up in two different pieces. You can see right down here in the gorge where they were excavating the Tyrannosaurus rex thigh, and there's a helicopter. But when they broke it and got it back to the laboratory, they found out, wait a second, this thing's got little capillaries in it and red corpuscles in it. That's probably blood cells. Now, they had already fallen apart. I mean, a few thousand years, you would expect things to pretty much fall apart. But nothing like this should last for 65 million years. So what do? Well, they try to deny that. Is there any other evidence of soft tissue? All kinds of it. Tissue fragments from Tyrannosaurus rex femur, shown at the left, is still flexible. It can't maintain any kind of flexibility for 65 million years. What about this? Protein from T-Rex bone. Protein won't last for 65 million years. Dinosaur bones. What about radiocarbon dating? Well, when they took samples from these and sent off to carbon dating laboratories, they didn't get back dates too old to measure, which if there was 65 million years, carbon-14 won't work back past 100,000 years. So therefore, they say, wait a second, there's something wrong here. How can these bones be less than 10 or 20,000 years according to carbon-14? And by the way, there's a whole nother lesson we could do on carbon-14 dating and how you have to recalibrate them, but never mind. Look at all this material that's been found by the evolutionists usually. Usually they were evolutionists, and yet this material can't last for 65 million years. This biomaterial will not last. And the type of proteins has proven that it's not water bringing any kind of corruption into it, okay? It had to come from the bone itself. 4-foot-long Tyrannosaurus rex horn found, well, it had material in it that just simply cannot last for 65 million years. And this, some of the material was still stretchable. Let me show you that. And that was a PhD in geology from Answers in Genesis commenting on that. There's no way flexible material can last for 65 million years. More soft tissue. So how do the evolutionists try to answer this? Oh, well, okay. They propose a theory called the iron model. Iron catalyzes reactions and forms cross-linkage between the proteins. That's how the proteins can last for 65 million years. They've never proven this. Total lie, but never mind. Let's assume it's true. Well, if iron catalyzes and causes cross-linking within the proteins, that means they're not stretchable anymore. No, folks. Their evidence, even their theories that they try to use to explain away the protein material for 65 million years is disproven by the flexibility. No. So is there zero evidence from the fossil record of man and dinosaurs at about the same time? No, we got plenty of evidence, folks. whether it's the dinosaur inside the mammal, whether it's the flexible materials, we know that certain materials cannot last for 65 million years. So the idea that dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago is a total lie. Let's go to the field of archaeology. This is my favorite evidence. This is the one I like the most. Indian cave paintings, okay? Let's go to the Havasupai Canyon in Arizona. This is part of the Grand Canyon. It's a side canyon. The Havasupai Canyon, many years ago, one of the evolutionists from over in California, he had a hunch. He had a hunch that the American Indians were on the American continent many years before anybody else thought they got here. So he was able to get a grant, and he was able to take his crew and go over to Havasupai Canyon and start looking for their garbage and the artifacts and things of that nature. So they did find it. They were able to prove that he was correct. The Indians had been here longer than anybody else had ever thought. But they also ran across some of the cave drawings of the Indians. And so when they dusted off the canyon walls inside of some of these caves, and we've actually got the pictograph that he actually published back about 1920s, okay? This is some of the cave drawings, antelope and deer and buffalo and all kinds of things. But look at this one right here. What is that creature? Well, let's see what the evolutionist said. The evolutionist said, this is a fairly good depiction of a known dinosaur that's literally raised its head up, balancing on its tail as if it's fighting against a group of men or reaching for higher foliage. What was the known dinosaur? Well, he thought it had been more like the Edmontosaurus. Now let's go over to Ica, Peru. Now things survive a long time down at Ica, Peru. In Ica, Peru, when people would die, sometimes they take these stones and bury it with the people. They're called burial stones. Now, long before this controversy on dinosaurs started up within the last 150 years, even back in 1571, the Spanish conquistadors mentioned that these stones had some strange creatures carved on them. Ica, Peru. Nazca burial stones, when they date them, they date to anywhere from 500 years ago to 2,000 years ago. There's a skull, as you see right there on the right, and there's a burial stone pointed to by the arrow. Now, Dr. Carrera, he's collected thousands and thousands of these stones, and there's some of them. What are those creatures? They look like dinosaurs, long neck, long tails. Thousands of stones, some of them small, some of them pretty good size there on the floor. Look at these. You got a Triceratops, horned creature, single horn up there. You got children on the back. Wait a second. So what do the evolutionists do with this? If you take a look at this dinosaur right here, I'll mark it in red for you. These things called dermal spines sticking up on the back of the dinosaur, the evolutionists said these are all fakes. And so therefore, the media picked up on that and repeated it across the world. They're just not a bunch of fakes. They're selling these things to tourists. They're fakes, 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 and fakes. Well, how do you know they're fakes? They're fakes because none of the Apatosauruses, as depicted in this image, had dermal spines on it. We don't find any dermal spines. So you see, they're just fakes, made up. They're not true. You know, they don't say that anymore. You know why? Because in 1992, we found the skin impression of these type of dinosaurs, and they had dermal spines on their backs. See, dermal spines doesn't have a bony material in it, so it's not generally going to survive when the creature becomes fossilized. Usually just the bones survive. So when we found the skin impression and had dermal spines, that proved that whoever made these stones knew more than modern day scientists know. Dermal spines? Yeah. Several Diplodocus-like dinosaurs have what appear to be dermal frills, never reported or verified by scientists before the early 1990s. And perhaps one illustration would be like this. The spines would be something like a shark's dorsal fin. There's over 15,000 of these Ica stones. 15,000? Look at that. And Stegosaurus over there. Maybe Triceratops there. They even got the skin impression correct. We didn't know that until the 1990s. Here's another one, 11,000 in just his museum. What about pottery from South America? There's some long-neck, long-tailed creatures. Now let's go to Acambaro, Mexico. Acambaro, Mexico, one of the mountains there. A particular doctor was riding along and saw something sticking out of the ground. He went down and dug it out, and it was a ceramic figurine, and some of them depicted dinosaurs. 33,000 ceramic figurines, and about 1,000 of them dinosaurs. Folks, ask yourself one simple question. When an evolutionist finds one single bone that he thinks shows the transition between dinosaurs and birds, it makes the national headlines, and it's across the entire world. They come up with a museum display, and they then carry this around the world, showing it all off. One single fossil, one evidence. Here we have thousands, and you've probably never heard of any of them. This is 1944. Acambaro, Mexico. I don't know about you, but those creatures just don't look like a giraffe. Dinosaurs, 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 and man. Remember, we didn't dig up the first bones of a dinosaur until 1820s. How did they make all these ceramic figurines? So what do evolutionists do? Well, I'll give you one example. They took small pieces from some dinosaur figurines from this collection, and they sent it off to two different dating laboratories. Now, these are upward evolutionist dating laboratories, University of Pennsylvania and Teledyne Isotope Laboratories, okay? They then dated them using carbon-14, and Dr. Rainey said they also took 8 additional samples of thermoluminescence. And they gave them extra tests. They did 18 runs on each one of the 4 samples. And I can show you my notes. That's a report of what they said. But the short conclusion is, quote from them, all in all, the lab stands on these dates for the Jules Rutz materials. Whatever that means in terms of archaeological dating in Mexico, or in terms of fake versus authentic. In other words, people think these are all made in modern days. These can't possibly be old, because then that would prove that man and dinosaurs lived at the same time. We stand behind the dates is what they said, right? Guess what happened when both laboratories were told that these fragments they were given were from dinosaur figurines? They put dates of 2,000 years on them, but all of a sudden their dates disappeared. Both labs withdrew their results after they were told that these pieces included dinosaur figurines. All kinds of silly excuses. In fact, let me look at my note here for just a second over here that you can't see on the screen, so I can read it quite accurately. They said this: when the lab at the University of Pennsylvania found out the dinosaurs are part of the collection, they retracted their thermoluminescent data. They asserted that the ceramics gave off regenerated light signals and could be no more than 30 years old. Now, you in the public, or me as an electrical engineer, what do I know about regenerated light signals? Well, when you go ask an expert, the thermoluminescent technician who ran the machines, he admitted, quote, no other ceramics existed in his experience that produced regenerated light signals. And no other thermoluminescent dating of ceramics had ever been done by utilization of a regenerated light signal. In other words, they made up something technical, sounded good, knowing that you wouldn't know what it meant, so they just lied to you. And by the way, there were 2 or 3 more labs that had these materials sent to them, and they all withdrew their data. One lab after the next keeps on lying about what they actually found. There's no honesty at these people. Now, let me say it this way. The scientists, I work around more scientists than most people do. At Kennedy Space Center, thousands of engineers and scientists. They are no more honest than the average person out in the public. It's just that in engineering, it has to work. So therefore, you've got to come up with results that work. And these theories, nothing has to work. They just write a paper, get to be published, get into public schools, get the media pushed behind it. Be careful when you listen to scientists. Even the news media knows that they can find a PhD that'll believe just about anything they want to print, or will tell them what they want to print is true. NBC, they went down and examined these evidences, and they called them fakes. When they dated them and got dates that are 100, 500 to 1,000 years ago, they still ignored that data and tried to explain away the carbon-14 dating. But let's just forget about all this carbon-14, thermoluminescence, and all these laboratories. Let's just use some common sense. What about scientists? How well do they do it finding bones in the ground, reconstructing them to see what the creature might have looked like originally? Well, here we go. In 1825, one of the first dinosaur bones found was from an iguanodon. They didn't get a whole lot of bones, so here's the way they reconstructed what an iguanodon looked like. So if you were a scientist, okay, this is what an iguanodon looked like. Well, a few decades later, they found a few more bones and said, oops, we were wrong. In fact, we now know the iguanodon looks something like this. Boy, I don't know about you, but that's tremendously different. But did you know, even though they thought they were wrong in 1825, 1895, they got this. They found out they're wrong on that, because if this creature had raised up like this, they show it in this image, it would have cracked the vertebrae in its tail. Therefore, they found more bones in the 1900s and said, nope, we were wrong in 1825. We were wrong in 1895. This is what the iguanodon looked like. Tail has to stick out the back. You can't lean back on it like that. So this, they finally figured out in the 1900s what an iguanodon looked like. So how come the ceramic figurine people got it right thousands of years before the scientists did? I guess they saw one. Forget about carbon-14. How did they make the proper tail? How did they put the dorsal fins on the back of these Diplodocus type of dinosaurs? How'd they do that? We didn't discover that till 1992. Yeah, because they saw the creatures alive. Long neck, long-tailed claws, whether it's burial claws and pottery. What about the Mesopotamian cylinder seal? Dates back to about 2000 BC. When you take that cylinder right there on the bottom left and you roll it across some clay, that's what you get right there on the bottom right. Long neck, long-tailed creatures. What about these? This goes back to, well, all the way back to United Egypt. Now let's go to natural bridges. Kyle Butt and Eric Lyons from Apologetics Press, and I'd highly recommend if you've never been to the Apologetics Press website, you'll really enjoy going there. Anyways, they actually went out there and gathered some of this evidence, but it's been known for quite some time. Natural bridges. Utah, Landing, Utah, Kachina Bridge. Okay, so what's that drawing do there in the bridge? That sure doesn't look like a water buffalo to me. No. Long neck, long-tailed creature. In fact, it even had an image of a crested head of a flying type of dinosaur, the pterosaur. One interesting thing is the Sioux Indians, whenever they're shown a picture of a pterodon and ask them what they call it by a certain name that in English, Ford named a car after it. It's called the Thunderbird. So somebody in their past had seen these creatures flying around, or at least described it to them, so they could write it down in some, well, they probably had word of mouth passed down. Well, let's go over to England right here. In fact, let me back that up just a second. Okay. Go from the United States, go over to England, we'll go down to this Carlisle Cathedral. When we go inside, notice in the very bottom of this image, we have a carpet down there. Well, for some reason, the culture back then in the 1500s, they would often bury people in the floor of their church buildings. So here's the tomb of Bishop Richard Bell, 1496. If you go there and ask them to take up the carpet, you'll notice there's a rim around his tomb in the floor. So let's look at the rim. What are those long-necked, long-tailed creatures doing drawn in the rim going around his tombstone? Now, what do we call this floor stone? Long neck, long tail creatures. And they even got the necks correct. Only recently has it been known that sauropod dinosaurs, such as the Patasaurus, would have their neck positioned horizontally instead of raised aloft as paleontologists believe. In other words, in the past, the fossil guys, paleontologists, thought the neck stuck up. They were wrong, horizontal, and yet they got this correct at his tomb. And they also got the tail suspended correct and things of that nature. Now, what about Cambodia? We just dug this out of the jungle. Not at this specific location. Let's go a little bit north of this right here. There we go. Let's dig it out of the jungle. Look at all those carvings of those walls. PhD in geology, Don Patton right there was over there, took some of these images. Notice, again, all the intricate drawings on the walls. And we're going to go right over here and look in this corner. And then we're going to zoom in and keep zooming in. There he is. Now, on this corner of this wall, you can see these circles where inside an animal is carved. Well, this one is obviously a monkey-like creature. It may not be a perfect image of a monkey, but you can tell it was a monkey, okay? There's another one right below it. Water buffalo. It may not be a perfect illustration of a water buffalo, but it's plenty close enough. What about a deer? Yeah, that's a deer. Well, what in the world is this guy? The only creature that fits, folks, is a stegosaurus. So what the evolutionist says, well, they got the head wrong. As if they've seen every variety of head on every stegosaurus that's ever been in the fossil record. Yeah, okay. Someone had to have seen this to draw this, folks, 800 years ago. That's long before the first dinosaurs are dug up 200 years ago. So what's the evidence from archaeology? Oh, we got so much evidence from cave drawings, burial stones, figurines, cylinder seals, just evidence after evidence after evidence after evidence after evidence after evidence. Therefore, we can say confidently that 65 million years ago is a lie. Man saw live dinosaurs. Man used to live with dinosaurs. Now, sometimes they make a movie like this one. I'm not saying this is what it looked like thousands of years ago. Man and dinosaurs. Remember that Geo guide for children? No human being has seen a live dinosaur? And use that to capture their interest? Yeah. Remember, the evolutionists admitted, though, if we found evidence, just one piece of solid evidence of man and dinosaurs, it would shake the foundations of evolutionary theory. Think of the poor evolutionists. They have to figure out a way to deny every single piece of evidence you have seen tonight. And I haven't showed you 1% of the total evidence that exists. So what do scientists do? Well, for one thing, they have to test their conclusions against data. If you don't give them data, what conclusion could they possibly come up with? And those scientists, at least the ones I know at Kennedy Space Center, they've never seen the data you're witnessing today. Rarely do I run across a scientist out there that's ever seen 1% of this. The Bible says in Colossians 2:8, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. By the way, the word philosophy, don't be spoiled you through philosophy. Philo meaning love, Sophie means man's wisdom. A lot of people like their own wisdom. They're in love with themselves. Don't follow them. Test all things, hold fast what is good. We don't believe the Bible because it claims to be from God. We believe it because we're able to verify and prove it's from God. So let's summarize. What has a tail like a cedar tree? Well, it's sure not an elephant, is it? No. Only thing that fits it, the trunk of a cedar tree, is a dinosaur. Remember those huge bugs in the past? shows that man living to long ages, no big deal, right? If rhinos could have gotten that big in the past, so what if human beings live for 912 years on average? Largest dinosaur hatched out of an egg, not much bigger than a football. How do you fit all the animals on the ark? Well, you take them when they're babies or young adults. And there's the reasons why. The ark had so much carrying capacity, 1.5 million cubic feet, that you could empty 569 railroad cars that would fit on the ark. Do not fall for these visual lies. In fact, even if you had, forget the 8,000 different kinds, 16,000 animals, 45,000 animals would only take up 1/3 of the ark. Plenty of room for food, and waste material would go off. Remember all those flood legends? Every continent on earth that man lives has its own flood legends. Over 270 flood stories. Yeah. And the Bible shows us how people could have passed down by word of mouth in just a few generations stories about Adam and the Garden of Eden. And history simply records dinosaurs as dragons, whether it's Marco Polo, Alexander the Great, whether it's the Indians and their Thunderbird, whether it's the fact that the ceramic figurines, the burial stones, have these dermal spines that prove they're authentic. Thousands of ceramic figurines from Acambaro, Mexico. And remember, even if you don't understand carbon-14 dating or any of these fancy techniques, thermoluminescence, you know that these people got it right long before today's scientists knew that they were wrong. So 1,000 years ago, they made this, and the scientists are just now catching up. And the Bible says the behemoth moves his tail like a cedar. So ask yourself this question. The Bible hasn't been changed in about 2,000 years. And it's quite reliable. And yet every single generation, man's books have disagreed with the Bible. And so man's opinions, his science textbooks on the right-hand side here, have to be rewritten every 50 years because they turn out to be wrong. They used to think the Bible was wrong because of such and such evidence. They had to give up on that evidence because they found out that was wrong. So when the Bible disagrees with man's science textbooks, which book do people try to change? They take out their scissors and try to change the one book that hadn't changed for 2,000 years. The one on the right that keeps changing every 50 years, they leave it alone. Only the Bible turns out to be reliable. If you'd like to see the evidence on that, it's a whole different lesson, 200 PowerPoint slides on a website called Miraculous Bible. How do you prove the Bible has a miraculous source? Jesus said in John chapter 3, if I have told you earthly things, and he did talk about Adam and Eve, and he talked about Noah, if I have told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one can outrun the judgment of God. The video we saw earlier, remember that one? When people see the destruction on this planet, they should realize they cannot outrun the judgment of God. Let's watch this again and let it sink in. Those people in that little boat, they couldn't outrun the judgment of God. She's going to hear the sound hit her ears, and it should remind her she cannot outrun the judgment of God. They should have got on the ark. They should have listened to Noah. Well, that was the first judgment. That was by water. The next one's going to be by fire. In flaming fire, taking vengeance on those who do not know God and on those who do not obey the gospel. Perhaps it'll look something like this. If you were actually come visit somewhere in Central Florida and you visit us at South Seminole Church of Christ building, we have some of these type of handouts. On the front, this would remind you of enough details for you to prove to anybody that man and dinosaurs, there's evidence of them living at the same time. And on the back of the sheet of paper, it has these images, which you've already seen. So if we can help you in any way in this discussion, just let us know, give us a call, ask for the evidences, or go to these websites. Norm, let me turn it back to you.
Thank you so much for that incredible presentation. Let me just run through a little bit of the audience reaction so that everyone can see why it is I wanted to have you on the podcast this evening, and as often as I can get you to come back. Tanya says, I love this. Me too. Fantastic podcast, David says. I agree, David. Sarah says, love this presentation and the way you explain it. I agree 100%. Tanya, or Terry rather, says it's a great presentation. Tanya says, powerful illustrations.
Thank you.
Hope says, wow. Let's see. Tanya says, I'm amazed at how God preserves the truth of his creation. Kyle says, wow. I agree, Kyle. Wow. Gwendolyn says, great lesson. Really learned much. Thanks, guys. Thank Jeffrey. He did all the teaching tonight. And Tanya says, powerful. You cannot outrun the judgment of God. Really, really good stuff. Do you want to go through some of the questions that came in from the audience during the presentation? And since I'm part of the audience, I get to go first.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, are you still making appointments to do your evidences seminars? I know that's how we met. Guy Dickinson was living between Florida and Jasper, Georgia, where I was preaching at that time. And one of the things he did while he was there at Jasper is he said, we've got to have Jeffrey Rowe come and do a evidences seminar. And that's been quite a while ago, about 15, 18 years ago. It's been quite a while. I don't think Donna was born when you were first there at Jasper. So she's 17 now. So it's been over 17 years ago since I met you, and I
think Donna. I think I remember Donna.
Yeah, you do, from Danville. Because when you came to Danville, Donna was, I think, probably 4 or 5 maybe. And that's when, after we finished the meeting with Brad Harrod, that you came and took part in that. As soon as that was over, we jumped in the car and drove all night to go to the Creation Museum. 13-hour drive.
I remember that.
Right. And so we really had a good time. Lenny says, excellent evidences. Really glad you were able to share these things with the audience this evening. Thank you. That was a lot of information. So you brought the Ark with you that time, and you showed a picture. Are you able to put specific slides on the screen? Do you have a picture of the Ark you can put up there? Because I remember you came up with a trailer behind your car, and this Ark was broken down in pieces in the trailer. And if I remember right, it's what, 1/36 to scale? Is that right? Or 1/32 to scale?
Somewhere around 1 part in 27 to 1 part in 30, somewhere in that range.
Okay. And it's made according to the biblical dimensions, and everything is accurate. And it's really an amazing piece of work. Your friend in Valdosta, I think, engineer, made that.
Yeah, Travis Strackbine, who worked in a boat factory down here and
Okay.
up there,
Mhm.
actually made the scaled model. The model is limited in that God doesn't tell us that all 3 decks were the same height. He just tells us it had 3 decks.
Mhm.
I would assume that maybe the bottom deck only had to be a little smaller where all the waste products could run off, but I don't know. Okay.
Right.
So we don't know where the window that wrapped the entire boat, that was a cubit tall. We don't know if it was back towards the middle, out towards the edge, or where that at. We don't know if the ends of the arc were more rounded, as some people might think. Uh, so we just made the model based upon the dimensions we're given, and just assumed the same size decks. And we put the window at
Mhm.
maybe a halfway point up in the top of the roof. So we're just taking our best guess. That's
Mhm.
all.
It's really an amazing job you guys did on reproducing the arc like that.
Oh, that was all Travis. 99% was Travis, easily.
Well, it's really good. Are you still going and doing seminars like you did there in Jasper?
No, I haven't done any these type of seminars at other places in years.
Okay.
There's a reason why, but um, it would be nice if people would pray for the efforts if they think it's a worthwhile cause.
Hmm.
The idea is this: there are people in the brotherhood that are very good with these type of presentations.
Hmm.
Okay, and so I would like to see more people. Well, I like to see more funding done to support a worldwide education system based on the Bible. That's what I would like to see.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, that's going to cost a few $1,000,000.
Right.
So it turns out, perhaps, I don't know what God's providence is. You can look back and maybe say that might have been God's providence. Like when Joseph was taken off into captivity, he didn't know at that time there was God's providence. But by Genesis chapter 50, he said, you meant it for bad, but God meant it for good.
Right.
So I don't know if it's God's providence, but he has allowed me to run across some technology things that I have a patent on for a bolt type of way of doing things that could be possibly worth millions of dollars. And
That's
so I've
great.
got to get a working prototype in front of people and try to get people to do things different than what they have for a few hundred years, because the customer will just love this. Okay.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, like most new ideas, it takes about 7 to 8 years for a patented new idea to get and to begin to get into a market. And since I've been trying to make these in my garage and my 3D printer behind me and some other type stuff and paying for some 3D services, I'm slower than the normal company that would take 7 years to get it out there.
Right.
And I'm an electrical engineer, so what am I doing? Making bolts. Okay. But I do have my name on another patent with a PhD in physics on ultrasonic bolt gauges. And that PhD in physics taught me some really nice things,
Mm.
which then led, after I was not being in business with him anymore, which led to this other idea, which I then got my own patent on, and tremendously cheaper than anything we did before. So if that would work out, I would like to fund a worldwide education system based on the Bible. So that's just where I've been putting efforts for the last few years, and
Hmm.
you know, maybe it'll
Well,
work.
I'm really glad that you're able to do it via podcasts like this. It's a great way to get to a large audience, and once it's there on the like right now we're streaming on YouTube and Facebook both. I don't know if you can tell there in the comments on the side that they're coming in from the two different platforms, and once it's there, it lives there, indefinitely. And so, people can keep watching it and keep interacting with it. And it's a really good way to get the information out. I wanted to have you on to share your research and your presentation. And I can tell from the feedback that the audience really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. One of the pictures or one of your slides, I was really glad that it included that point, because that's a point I had made in a lesson I preached not long ago called "Is There Enough Salt?" And I had pointed out that the ark was much bigger than what Noah actually needed just for his family and the animals he would have to take. And your slide pointed out that even if it was 45,000 animals on the ark, it would have only used 1/3 of the space.
Yeah.
And
that's with each one of the animals being the average size of a sheep.
right,
Pretty good size animal. Okay. So.
right. And so the point I had made in that lesson, is there enough salt, was that, to save the world from the flood, 8 people wasn't enough salt. There would not enough preservative, and God destroyed the earth. Okay, Noah preached for 120 years. Peter calls him a preacher of righteousness. He preached for 120 years.
Okay.
So why have Noah preach for 120 years and then not provide people that would respond to his preaching a place of safety, the ark? And then the question comes up, well, what if Noah was so successful that he converted enough people that there wasn't enough room in the ark? And the point I made, well, we do have examples of God saying, if there's this much salt, and I'm using that term from Jesus saying you're the salt of the earth, if there's 10 righteous people, that's the salt. If there's 10 righteous people, then I won't destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So we do know that there's examples of God saying, okay, if there's this many righteous people there, then the destruction can be forestalled. Well, what if Noah filled up the ark and ran out of space? Would God have said, okay, I won't flood the earth? It's speculation, but we do have precedent for that speculation, I think.
Yeah.
So what happens when the world gets to the point to where there's not enough salt to preserve the earth? And I think that goes back to that slide with the fire, the destruction by fire, which was a powerful slide, by the way. And I really enjoyed the presentation. If people want to contact you, is there a contact on your website, Truth About Dinosaurs or Miraculous Bible? I've got the link to Miraculous Bible in the show notes.
As far as I know, there is. It probably will, if they call a telephone number, there'll probably be a telephone number at the church building.
Okay.
Because a lot of times, they want to come by and see the model of Noah's Ark or something like that.
Right. Okay. So there's a contact there in the show notes if you want to get in touch with Jeffrey or with the church there in Florida where Jeffrey is a member. Then use the contact information there on miraculousbible.org. That's linked in the show notes. And another question. It's bad. I can't read my own handwriting. Hold on. I got to get my note here.
Let me make one comment here. We have the website miraculousbible.org.
Mm-hmm.
We have the website truthaboutdinosaurs.org.
Mm-hmm.
We have the website upwardevolution.org. So we've got a few different websites that give you links to PhDs that are a lot more reliable in the different fields that show you the evidences.
Right. And I think those are all linked. If they go to one, then they're linked between them that they can go to the others, right?
I don't think unfortunately, I'm not a website designer, so they're pretty ugly websites. So some of the linking is probably there, but I need to get someone who knows how to build websites and just redo those 3.
Well, they're definitely loaded with information, and maybe we can talk about that, doing some web work for you. That's something that I have enjoyed doing, and I've made my own personal websites and church websites and business websites, and so maybe that's something we can talk about doing behind the scenes. Would you like to? How much time do you have?
It's up to you. It's not a problem. I was going to try and see if I could get another window to come up. Let me, well, I'll do it this way. Never mind. I'll peel this off on the screen that you can actually save. And if you want to, well, it's having trouble getting there.
Well, while you're working on that, you want to take some of the questions that came up in the live chat?
Sure. Now I can't get to my site. Wonder why.
It's not on Amazon Web Services, is it?
No.
Uh,
Okay.
how
There we
about?
go.
Okay, go ahead.
The only thing I was going to say is, yes, there's evidence the Bible's from God, but over on the right, you'll see links to all kinds of questions that people have. What
Hmm.
about evil, pain, and suffering? What about vestigial organs? Does the Bible have contradictions? How do you answer that? Archaeology, evidences for the Bible, America's godly heritage, all kinds of things. You'll see over here on
Right.
the right links to all kinds of information.
Mm.
So that's probably the most valuable thing on this whole website is those links over on the right.
Yeah, that's when I've gone to your website and gone through the information there, it is just a wealth of information on that. You have compiled an amazing amount of information there, and it's really useful for people that want to learn more about the evidence and to go into more detail and more depth to dig
Yeah.
into that. It's really good. What about this question? What about the gap theory? Can you explain briefly what the gap theory is? I'm sure a lot of people looking at that don't know what the gap theory is.
Well, generally, people want to come up with some way to squeeze millions or billions of years
Right.
into the Bible chronology so they can claim they still believe the Bible and yet don't have to look like idiots and fools around everybody else saying they believe in thousands of years.
Right.
So it's just a way of compromising. And
Mhm.
when you actually look at it, they're trying to say there's a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2.
Right.
So, and they try to go with this bara versus a shah word out of the
Mhm.
Hebrew and things of that nature. But if you actually put it to the test, it fails at every single justification they try to use.
Right.
Trying to make a
Yeah.
difference between a shah and bara in the Hebrew. Well, it doesn't work because over there where he created Adam and Eve, it says he ashad them, and he also says he bara'd them. So they're
Right.
used interchangeably. So it
Right.
can't possibly fit their theory. Then you go over to Proverbs or Psalms and other places, just wipes their theory completely out. So
Mhm.
once again, if you take out your glasses and you only look at a couple verses at a time, you can come up with any theory you want.
That's right.
But if you take the Bible, as the Bible says, the sum of thy word is truth.
That's right. So the gap theory tries to fit the uh, millions and billions of years that evolution needs between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. And like you said, it's a way to try to compromise with evolution or molecules to man evolution, we should say, or your term, upward evolution.
Now,
Um,
as you know, Norm, the answer is in Exodus 20:11. For in
mhm,
6 days the Lord made the heavens, earth, the sea, and all that's in them. Or
right.
Exodus 31:17, which is also part of that is referenced over in Hebrews. Just it doesn't work. You
Right.
have to call God a liar somewhere in
You,
order to
you,
fit billions of years in there.
you have to take very select passages out of context in isolation from, like you just did, giving the parallel passages that show us how to interpret Genesis chapter 1. And this idea that there's a gap in there, it just won't work. Um, let's there was another one here. Yeah, here it is. So
But,
we got the
but let me make
go ahead.
one last comment. I do not believe that is a good answer to the person's questions. I
Hmm.
did not give a good answer simply because I can say what's wrong with the gap theory and what it's trying to do. But what we really need to do when people use that as an excuse for billions of years, we need to show them the evidence this is for a young Earth.
Right.
And that's a whole nother
Which is a
200
lot.
PowerPoint slide. I got 200 PowerPoint slides on that one, and
Right.
I won't even cover 1% of the evidences for that.
Well, we will definitely talk and set a time for you to come back and make that presentation, because that's another one that is just a fascinating presentation for the age of the Earth. And um, it always amazes me that somebody runs for some public position, could be for dog catcher or sheriff or
Yeah.
could be about anything. And one of the things that they're going to ask them inevitably every time, if they are connected with any branch of conservative Christendom in the broadest sense of that term, they're going to ask them, do you believe the earth is only 6,000 years old? Because, and they're asking it to try to make the person look foolish. Well, what is foolish about that when you see the evidence, and the evidence points to the fact that that is the truth? But yet the general perception is that only rubes believe that. Only ignorant people believe that.
When people ask me those type of questions and you try to squeeze it into a short answer, I simply say this. Well, do you believe it rains on the planet? Yes or no? Well, yeah, of course it rains. Well, how long has it been raining on the planet according to your theory? According to your theory, it's been raining for 3.5 billion years. Okay, go out and measure the erosion rate. How much dirt and everything else in erosions is all the major rivers in the world carrying into the oceans? How much? How long would it take you to erode down everything above sea level all the way down? 13, 14 million years. Oh, so 3.5 billion years of rain? Now, you would have already eroded everything down to sea level so many times, it's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean,
wait a minute, it's pushing up at the same time as eroding down. No. Have you ever checked into the buoyancy factors of the continental plates and granitic rock on the mantle? That won't work either, folks. Okay.
Right.
But
yeah, that's what I mean. When you look at the actual evidence, instead of just, throwing platitudes out there, you look at the actual evidence. It won't, like you said, it won't work. You can't make it work with factual information.
Well, I like how one scientist said it. He said it this way: if you take a look at every single way there is to put an approximate maximum age on the Earth, over 90% of the scientific evidences say that billions of years is scientifically impossible. But we only hear about the ones that might possibly fit their theory. That's the only one that makes the textbooks or anything else.
Right. So we got the gap theory that, like you said, we for necessity's sake, we have to just kind of skim over it and state briefly why it's not right, with the understanding that there's a whole lot more that needs to be said about it. But in short, yeah, like you said, gap theory won't work. And then we've got this other one, the day age theory, where were the days of creation 24 hours or a much longer period of time? And one of the things you pointed out in your presentation was the age of human beings before the flood. Well, if before the flood, the days, now this is specifically talking about the days of creation, but if our understanding of a 24-hour day wasn't, what they were going by then those, 926 years of somebody's lifespan would be even longer than that.
Yeah. Right.
If 24 hours, if a day isn't 24 hours, then there's no way for us to know. It's telling, I think, that the same people that want to make the day age argument will then turn around and say, well, those lifespans they're not counting years the same way we count years. So yeah, they were like 70, 80 years old too, but they just were counting it differently. Okay, well, which is it? Were the days a whole lot longer then, or were they, a lot shorter? Which one is? You can't have it both ways.
Well, generally, just ask them to look at the data. If you want to say, well, it really wasn't 912 years average because they were counting a month as a year. This is one of the arguments. Right. Oh, okay. So you got some kids born when they were 7 years old.
Right.
Parents were 7 years old.
It doesn't work.
That doesn't work too well. Number two is, let me see, he formed the sun, moon, and stars. Okay, fine, for science for days, seasons, and years, right there in the context. But year is not a year. What in the world's a day and what's a season? Things of that nature. It's, unfortunately, we as human beings have a tendency to seek the approval of other human beings.
Right.
When we do that, we don't want to come off as foolish to go against what the vast majority that's taught out there. Because in reality, we can't test the data for ourselves in all these different scientific fields. So what we've got to do is just find some sources that we can trust. And if you can find some people and put them to the test, I found some sources that I can trust in some areas of science, but I wouldn't trust some of their doctrine. But once you know, okay, if a person gets on a witness stand and they're your enemy and they say something good about you, it's probably true, right? So you look for those type of evidences too, okay? Even from someone who's against Christianity, things of that nature, like Stephen Jay Gould, the top evolutionist in the United States, okay? He flat out said Darwin's evolutionary theory, when Darwin wrote his book, that caused racism to go up by a factor of, he called it orders of magnitude. Now, magnitude, most people don't deal with. It means a factor of 10. And the word orders is in plural, so at least 2. So 2 orders of magnitude is 100. He's saying that Charles Darwin, evolutionary theory, caused people to increase racism by a factor of 100. At least their arguments for it and trying to justify it.
Right.
He's an enemy of Christianity. Right. So yeah, that's pretty good evidence right there. Or he'll tell you that the horse evolution they found that's in all the textbooks is a lie. Well, he's a paleontologist. Yeah, he knows that. Okay.
Right.
But I sure wouldn't trust him on doctrine.
Right. That's right. Well, what about this day age theory where the days of creation weren't actually 24 hours? They were long eons of time.
Well, let's just go to when was the plants and the flowers and fruit trees all made? Okay.
Right.
They're made on day 3.
Right.
So how long did they have to wait before they got pollinated? Because the flying...
Too long, according to the day age theory. They couldn't survive without the insects.
Yeah, that's day 3. So you got day 4. God didn't make the insects. He makes the sun, moon, and stars. So now you're stuck to day 5. So if each one's millions and billions of years, your flowering plants just don't get pollinated.
Right. So yeah, the day age theory won't work just from the standpoint of nature. Things like you said, the plant life can't survive. And there's also, you referred to Exodus 20:11 earlier. What's the basis for the 7-day week? It's not lunar. It's not solar. It's not, because of the seasons break down into 7-day weeks. A 7-day week doesn't even evenly fit into the solar calendar. That's why we have a leap year. We have to add an extra quarter of a day, right? So what's the only explanation for the 7-day week? It's creation. So how does that make sense if each day was an eon of time? How could Moses say that God worked 6 days and he rested the 7th day, meaning he was finished with creation? He rested the 7th day. And so that's the basis for the Sabbath day law. So you have to rest the 7th day. Well, I mean, if the day age theory was right, then that would mean that they, should rest for 60 million years. I don't know. How long is an eon? What's it? What is an eon typically in years? A long time.
Well, if they don't want to be an idiot, according to the rest of the world and the media, they got to figure out how to do 13.72 billion years for the universe. Well, now you got another problem. Sun, moon, and stars were created after the Earth. Oops, sorry, got that backwards wrong too. No, evolutionary theory doesn't allow that. So not much of anything fits. Now, man comes up with good sounding excuses for whatever he wants to believe. But generally, if you came up with a theory that says, well, maybe it's this way, shouldn't people first think in their mind? I use the word maybe. That automatically means, what? Maybe I'm wrong.
Right.
If it's maybe you're right, it's obviously maybe you're wrong.
That's right. The other side of the maybe fits too.
Yeah, they ought to at least test both sides of their thinking, but they only want to go to one side.
And if truth was what actually mattered to people researching the whatever it is, if their agenda was truth, then they would test both sides. But their agenda is not truth. Their agenda
Well,
is to prop up their own worldview, to seek validation for their own worldview. And if the truth gets in the way of that, then they'll shove that in a bottom drawer somewhere and not let anybody see it.
well, my favorite lesson isn't dinosaurs. It's not the age of the earth. I got another one on fossil record. I got another one on races. I got another one on coronavirus. Those aren't my favorite lessons. My favorite lesson is famous scientists who honored God and the scientific evidences in God's word that man didn't discover for thousands of years. Those are my
Right.
favorite evidences. Like, give you an example. Isaac Newton. When I went to school, I never remember being taught anything about Isaac Newton's religious background. Not in the public schools, not in the textbooks. But there was this other scientist who was kind of famous for radioactive elements, things of that nature, Madame Curie. Oh, I heard she was an atheist.
Mm.
So we don't say anything about the guy's religious background, such as Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell and all the top scientists for just about every single fundamental section of science, was the father of chemistry, the father of physics, was the father of biology. Yeah, they honor God a lot. Okay.
Mhm.
Isaac Newton, though, he was so well known by the entire country that he knew his Bible. In fact, when he was a student, college got shut down. He comes back after the shutdown, and his favorite professor, and Isaac was also this professor's favorite student. His name was Dr. Barrow. Well, Dr. Barrow was the math professor at this religious college. I mean, the number one type student they turned out was preachers, okay? Cambridge, Oxford, they were religious colleges.
Mhm.
So here's the math professor. The math professor was called the best preacher in the entire country, according to the king. So the math professor, who's the best preacher in the country, according to the king, he's talking with Isaac Newton, and he's talking to him. So, okay, you made a great discovery here, beginning rudiments of calculus, things of that nature. So basically, Isaac Barrow quit his job when Isaac Newton graduated. So he quit his job so Isaac could have his job. So he goes off and does some preaching things for a few years. He comes back many years later, and he says, this college has gotten too liberal. You all aren't following the rules. We got to set some discipline down here. You all have to follow the rules. Well, unfortunately, Isaac Newton wasn't following one of the rules. So he had to call Isaac into his office and say, hey, Isaac, you and I get along fine. I like your research, your work, things of that nature, but you haven't signed the holy orders.
Mm.
Well, Isaac said, those holy orders say that you believe this about in religion and Christianity, and some of those things are against what the Bible actually teaches. So here's the best preacher in the country who's been put in charge of the entire college now by the king, discussing with a professor of mathematics, Isaac Newton, okay? And they're going back on a Bible discussion. Isaac Barrow, again, best preacher in the country according to the king, finally says to Isaac Newton, well, Isaac, it is true. You know your Bible better than everybody else here combined. Isaac Newton wrote 1.3 million words on religious topics, 2 books defending the Bible. The whole country knew he was religious more than these other preachers and everything. So much so that when Isaac became old enough to finally retire, the whole country, they had a problem with their economy. One of the problems was their monetary base. The coins were getting worn down, so they couldn't quite see what this coin was worth and things of that nature, the print on it. And so they want people to turn in their silver and gold coins. Well, people weren't stupid. They knew governments in the past would get people to turn in their coins, and they shave off a little bit and keep it back and restamp it, things of that nature, maybe mix in some cheaper metals with it and give it back to them. So they're basically losing 5 or 10% every time they turn them in. They didn't want to do it. So the government for years couldn't get people to turn in their coinage. So someone in the government says, I know how to fix this problem. We'll put Isaac Newton in charge of the mint. Everybody will trust him. They did. It worked perfectly. It was the best exchange they ever had. And it would work, and it was done honestly. So why isn't that story told? Because that would encourage people today to be Christians.
That's right.
Or I'll say it this way. I want you to take 1,000 people out there. Let's say I live down in Florida. So imagine in your mind, you're down in Florida. You take 1,000 people, tell them to get in their cars and go visit the Grand Canyon. But nobody has a map. All they know is it's somewhere west of here. Okay. Okay. Do you think anybody would run across the Grand Canyon? Sure, it's 200 and some miles long. Some of those people are going to stumble across the Grand Canyon, right? But if you gave them a map, wouldn't they find it a lot faster?
Sure.
Well, that's what happens in creation versus evolution. Whether it's biology, whether it's chemistry, whether it's physics, when you start with God's word, things just work out better. You don't stumble across so many errors. It's not I'm not saying it tells you exactly go to the Grand Canyon by taking a left here and go on this highway and go there, but it gives you enough general information where you beat everybody else. So Isaac Newton beat everybody else.
Mm.
Michael Faraday beat everybody else, the greatest experimental physicist of all time.
Mm.
He was so well known for his Bible, he wasn't even allowed at Oxford or Cambridge because he was too correct to what the Bible said. But anyways.
Mm. Yeah, that's one of the things I've thought about a lot is how much further along, we think that we're in some golden age of scientific discovery and information and all of these things. But how much further along would we be if instead of looking at nearly every branch of science through the lens of trying to disprove the existence of God, people approach those sciences for what they are, the way that God gave us to understand his creation. And we were looking at the sciences from that viewpoint, that this is the way for us to investigate and to understand a purposefully designed, created universe. Do you think that would eliminate a lot of the roadblocks in whatever the avenue of science is, if, like you said, they were using the right roadmap to get where they wanted to go?
Well, there's a lot of evidence out there. One example comes to mind is if you were in the late 1800s, early 1900s, evolutionists were teaching vestigial organs. You got these leftovers. In other words, we came from a monkey, so therefore your tailbone back there used to be the tail of an ape-like creature type stuff. They came up with all these theories, whether it's appendix, whether it's a thyroid gland, all these different things. They're just leftover appendages. What they were is they were organs that man did not understand yet.
Right.
So therefore, for decades, they didn't study them because they thought they were left over from being an ape.
Right.
So because they ignored studying them, they didn't discover what they could have discovered. They said, no, God created everything. Maybe there's a reason for this. Now things degrade over time and get worse over time, but there's no such thing as, tail coming from an ape-like creature and appendix just came out of who knows where they think that thing came from.
Yeah, I was just talking about vestigial organs the other day, and that very point that the medical sciences looking at the human body from an evolutionary standpoint, they're starting from a false premise, so they're going to make mistakes about their investigation of the human body, and so where they used to yank the appendix out, at the drop of a hat, or probably more correctly, tonsils. They used to just rip tonsils out. If somebody complained of having a sore throat, they say, oh, well, let's take your tonsils out, right? Well, now they don't do that. Now they're a lot more hesitant to take out the tonsils because now they know that they're part of, I think I said the other day, part of the immune system. Probably should have said endocrine system, right? The tonsils, that's what they've discovered about your tonsils, is that they're part of have to do with your hormones and your immune system. And right, am I saying that right? That'd be endocrine system, right?
I don't know the distinction between the two. Medical science is not my expertise anyways.
Right. But that I think that is an important point, that if they viewed medicine and the human body from the viewpoint that there's a purpose for the different parts, it was put there for a reason, let's figure out what that reason is. But instead, they look at it from the point of, well, there's no discernible function for it from where we're looking at it right now. So it must be vestigial. It must be something left over from the evolutionary process. Well, that's the wrong starting point. So yeah, you're going to come to a wrong conclusion.
Now, some people might think, well, that's just an old argument. They made mistakes. Science corrects itself and gets better. Okay, ask them, go look up the phrase junk DNA.
Right.
They don't use that term in the technical circles anymore, do they?
No.
Because they found out it's not junk.
That's right.
In other words, they thought it was left over from evolution, so they didn't want to study it. So many years later, they finally studied it. It's actually useful.
It means something.
Functions.
Right.
It's being coded for. Evolution would have got, if it had been junk, evolution would have gotten rid of it because why would you make a copy of something and keep it if it's just taking up energy and things of that nature? The one who stops copying it, stops making it, would have energy left over to make more genes, to have more kids and things of that nature. So those genes get passed on. You get rid of this junk DNA. So it doesn't work.
Right. So, I mean, I could sit here and talk about this stuff with you all night. It's like Tanya said, I love this. So let me see. I did want to point out here Isaiah's point after he talked about the 24-hour days. Could they have been longer periods of time? And the answer to that is not 1 Peter chapter or 2 Peter chapter 3 with God 1 day is as 1,000 years and 1,000 years is 1 day. That has nothing at all in the context to do with the age of the earth.
Well, let's just give them two answers. Number one is say, okay, every day is 1,000 years. What good does that do? You need 4.6 billion.
Right.
It's not going to do any good.
Right. So even if you allow for that, it's still not enough time. But
then number two is if it's 1,000, in other words, what people think God would do in 1,000 years, he might do in a day. And what they think he should do in a day, he might take 1,000 years to do it. That's kind of the context, right? You notice anything in there having anything to do with creation? No, it's not about creation to begin with. So again, there's no evidence that any writer ever hinted at billions of years for anything.
Right. So that the Bible says with God a day is 1,000 years and 1,000 years as a day. It seems like people only want to use that verse to refer to the day age theory to make 1 day 1,000 years. But like you said, even that's not enough time. But that's not all Peter said. He says 1,000 years as 1 day. Okay. So Peter's using both sides of that to say that time is irrelevant to God. You can't hold God to your timetable when he's, referring to the scoffer saying that things have continued as they are from the beginning, which wasn't true, right? They forgot about the flood. That's why Peter reminded them of the flood, that things haven't continued from the beginning as they've always been. And you're trying to hold God to your timetable, saying, why hasn't Christ come back yet? He must not be going to come back. And Peter is basically using this phrase to say, you can't hold God to your timetable. He's not bound to your lifetime or 1,000 lifetimes. He's not bound to your time frame. And to use it for something else is to take it out of its context. And we don't want to do that. That's Isaiah, that's what's called eisegesis, when you read something into the passage that isn't there. What we want to do is exegesis. We want to lead out the truth from the passage, which means we want to just understand it the way that the original writer meant it. We want to understand his original meaning for what he wrote, and to be careful that we don't try to read things into it that he didn't say, right?
And it still doesn't do him any good, no matter how they use it.
Right, right. It doesn't provide enough time. That's right.
So on day 3, Let me see. We got the flowering plants right there. We got to wait 2,000 years for the insects to show up.
Right.
Oh,
Which wouldn't work.
those plants are dead.
Right. Let's see. I'm not going to keep you here all night and take every one of these, but here's an interesting one that I thought would be maybe a little provocative. When Genesis 6 speaks of giants, Nephilim, were they angelic beings who married human women? Are these the bones of 9 feet men that have been found? Well, that is true of archaeology. That archaeologists have found giants, and there's, I would say, almost as much giant people fossils as Jeffrey had talked about with the dinosaur fossil. There's a lot of it. It's not, it's not rare, but you never hear about it in, I guess we might say, the mainstream archaeological circles. You don't hear about it. It's not published. It's not put out there.
Well, some of it comes from people who have talked about 11.5-foot humans.
Right.
No, I've never seen anything verified and those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
When you get up to Goliath type sizes, yes, okay.
Right.
Found some cultures had people that seem to be genetically predisposed towards some great heights. But as far as I know, the word giants and Nephilim seems to me to imply that they were great warriors. They were giant of a man in the sense of the leadership or the people who went behind them and things of that nature. And it wasn't being very positive about them, but and as you can tell, the rest of the context is pretty bad. And we take a look at today. Who would be considered as a giant in the United States? Well, I don't know. If someone's a Democrat, maybe they call Biden and Kamala Harris giants. If they're Republican, maybe they think Donald Trump is a giant. Okay, fine. So people who puff themselves up, get into areas where they have a big following, have a tendency to be a bit selfish and a few other things that's pretty far away from God's direction.
So you mean giant there could be used in a figurative way or a metaphorical way, not necessarily of actual physical height and stature, but I guess like you said, like we would use the term giant as powerful presence.
Well, I don't know if it's metaphorical because why does the word giant, where in the text does it say anything physical? It's quite open to, they could be a giant of a man, giant of influence.
That's interesting.
I don't know.
Well, we definitely do read about giants in the Bible, like you said, like Goliath.
Yes.
But
not in that chapter.
No. I've had to, I guess, more recently, maybe rethink my position on Genesis 6. I have been of the view that the sons of God intermarrying with the daughters of men there was talking about the godly line of Seth intermarrying with the worldly line of Cain, and that's what brought that's what brought about the corruption that led to the destruction of the world. I'm still more leaning to that view, but I've seen some things in my personal study that have, I guess I'm open to reevaluating that, is the way I'm trying to say it.
I'm not saying I'm sure it's not physical. It could be physical. Right. Okay, fine. But if you take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, I believe about verse 26, somewhere around there, it talks about people who are very popular in the society, whether they're noble, whether they're rich, and it says not many. So if you take a look at that culture, so here you got the Corinthians, and probably a fairly large congregation, you say, hey, look among the called here, okay? How many of these people are rich? How many are famous? How many are noble? Seems to be a lower percentage than what you have out in the culture, right?
Right.
So generally people who have those type of attributes are a little more prideful, which God hates, selfish, things of that nature. So Generally, the Christian isn't looking to lead a country as a noble or a mighty warrior or things of that nature. Not that he couldn't be, but that's just not their general roles that they take on in the society.
Hmm. Here's let's see. Here's one that I think you covered in your presentation with some of the graphics of the seafloor breaking up. And the question is the continental drift theory true?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's just continental sprint, not drift.
Right.
Think about it. You take two mountains, let's say you take two continents. You start moving towards each other, which, by the way, Genesis 7:11, when all the fountains of the great deep broke open, cleaved open, the 40,000-mile baseball seam around the earth splits open. You'll start continents moving. And as they start moving, the theory is they're probably get up to a few miles per hour. That's a whole lot more than 4 centimeters per year, okay, that they presently have. But generally, if you watch a movie by Hollywood, and let's say they take a train that's got 20 or 30 cars in it, and they slam it into a building, does it immediately stop to just hit that wall and just stop? No, it keeps going and going and going and going. Why? Because in real life, something that massive, like a train, the engine of the train, weighs so much, it just takes a long time to slow it down.
Right.
Well, imagine what it would take, two continents slamming into each other, one subducting underneath the other. Just think about how long it's going to take for them to finally slow down to today's 4 centimeter rate. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a documentary that came out a few years ago. I believe the name of it was Is Genesis History? Are you familiar with that?
I think I've seen a couple of their episodes. They do an excellent job.
Yeah,
just doctrinal errors, but
sure, yeah. I mean, that's kind of to be expected, unfortunately. But I remember in that documentary, he made a statement that I thought was really, really good. And he said that the natural disasters and things that we see today, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, these things, that's the earth still settling down from the flood. It's like you said, the continental started out as a sprint. Now from our perception of it, it's drifting. But how fast did those things separate when everything first blew up and water's flying out of the crust of the earth and covers the whole earth with a flood? And I thought that was a really good way to put it, that the earth is still settling down from that. And that's what volcanic eruptions are and all these things.
In fact, most people believe that the earth at least had an ice age, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you run through the physics, it turns out that Noah's flood would have heated up the ocean water so much it would have created an ice age if you could put enough soot and ash into the atmosphere to start blocking off a substantial percentage of the sun, maybe 5, 10, 15%. It turns out the model for the worldwide flood is the only scientific model that anybody's ever imagined that fits the data. No evolutionist has ever taken any model of this planet in their computers and ever been able to get 1 mile thick ice. They only get 40, 60, 70 feet.
Right. This is the kind of comment that I really love. Lenny said, kids loved it. Talking about your presentation, kids loved it. 10, 8, and 4. That's fantastic to get this information out there to young kids while they're forming their worldview. I think is fantastic, because now they will never ever look at one of those little toy arks again and think that that's Noah's Ark. They'll know. They'll laugh at it and say that's not what it was, and that's really good. I really like that.
That's why I wish we could get a worldwide education system based on the Bible without doctrinal compromise, so that members of the Church of Christ and anybody else that wants to use it, it's all free to the world, okay, could literally let the kids see the truth first because typically the first time you learn something has more influence on you than the next 7 times. But unfortunately, the lies get there first.
Right. I think Lenny says here, but they deliberately forget that long ago by God's word, the heavens came into being and the earth was formed out of water and by water. That's that same context that Isaiah quoted from Peter, that one day is as 1,000 years and 1,000 years is one day. And Peter shows them that things aren't all continuing. Everything's not just continuing like it always was. You forgot about the flood. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. Gwendolyn said, God doesn't exist in time. That's exactly what Peter's point is. God doesn't exist in time. You can't try to bind him to your time frame. That's right. God is eternal. So I think
one last little tidbit. Mentioned water, made out of water.
Mm-hmm.
There's a physicist, PhD in physics. Very interesting theory. I don't know if it's true, but his idea is, what if the earth was pure water, H2O molecules, and all the molecules, typically you got a H2O, okay? You got an oxygen molecule. The hydrogen molecules are setting off to one side. They're not 180 degrees apart from each other. Because they're slightly off to one side and the oxygen likes to pull on to the valence electrons a little bit more, it ends up with a slight polarity. And he said, well, just what if all the hydrogen molecules that God created for the earth and all the planets and everything, what if they were all lined up pointing in the same direction? You'd end up with a huge electrostatic field. Well, as soon as the instant after he creates it, those fields randomly try to reorient it. So you have a tremendously collapsing electrostatic field, which creates a magnetic field. And the changing magnetic field creates another electrostatic field, which then creates another electromagnetic. It just goes back and forth on this oscillator. And it explains where the Earth's magnetic field comes from.
Wow.
Now, I'm not saying it's right. And I might have stated his theory incorrectly between electrostatic and electromagnetic versus magnetic field. I may have said something wrong in there, okay? But what he did is he said, okay, does it explain the strength of the Earth's magnetic field? It did, but no big deal. Okay, so the theory fit. It was designed to make sure it would fit, right? So let's take that same model and go to Venus. Work there. Go to Mars. Well, wait a second. Mars got a low one. It explains that too, because it has something to do with the size of the core and other things. And so he applied it to different planets and it fit. So then he predicted what it would be like before we ever measured it when we got the Uranus and Neptune. He predicted what the fields would be. All the evolutionists predicted fields 1,000 to 100,000 times lower than what he predicted. When the satellites got there, he turned out to be right. Now, I'm not saying that's the way God created them, but isn't it interesting the creationists ended up with a model to fit the data before?
Right. It's a plausible explanation, and I think that's one of the things that scientists, or quote scientists, have kind of thrown out the window is plausibility. They just throw these models out there that have no real plausibility to them at all, and in a matter of almost a blink of an eye, they go from being a hypothesis to a theory to, well, now it's fact. Now you got to put it in the kids' textbooks when it's not even plausible, much less, even the possibility of being factual. And so it is interesting that when somebody looks at the data, whatever it is, whatever branch of science it is, they look at the data from the right perspective. It's not necessarily the fact of the matter, but it is plausible because they're staying within the scope of the truth of where things came from, the origin. Right? If you start from a false premise, then you're already wrong before you even get going.
Yeah,
and that's the problem with the prevalence of evolutionary theory in science is they're starting from the wrong start point, and so of course where they go is wrong.
And their purpose was to get rid of God.
That's right.
Whether it was Charles Lyell and his geology textbook that Charles Darwin took with him on the Beagle in 1820s, the purpose was to get rid of God.
Right. That's why I keep putting this hashtag up, because when you look at the motivation for where a lot of this stuff came from, truth wasn't really the motivation at any point. It was for an agenda, life without God, like you said in the beginning. That is the agenda of a lot of the ones that are, I don't know if this is the right way to say it or not, but the ones that are in control or are driving the different branches of science. Truth is not their agenda. Life without God is their agenda. And so, a lot of what they say is just completely absurd.
Well, as people saw tonight, if one of those ceramic figurines proved evolution true, they'd be across the headlines.
Right.
But
see, that's the thing. You never see any of the things that you presented tonight. You never see any of those things in mainstream media. Never. Why? Because it doesn't fit their agenda. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It doesn't fit their agenda, so they're not interested. They don't want to put it out there because truth isn't what matters to them.
Well, I'll give you an example. Acambara, Mexico, ceramic figurines. Evolutionists sent down one of their unbiased scientific investigators. Unbiased. Sounds good, right?
Right, yeah.
So they show a video. I believe this is NBC. I've got it on VHS tape quite a few years ago. Okay. And so he goes down there and he unboxes these ceramic figurines, and he has the camera point to a particular table where he's got some dinosaur figurines there. He says, well, you see, those dinosaur figurines, they're all fakes because they're made out of the same type of black clay that couldn't possibly last for thousands of years. Absolutely impossible. And number two, second reason we know they're fakes, they all have the same artistic style. Okay. Do you think he might have just picked the ones that fit his story and put it on that table?
Yeah,
oh, by the way, all you got to do is wait 5 more minutes in the same video where they're pointing at a table with ceramic figurines that aren't black. They aren't the same. Completely falsified what he had said 5 or 10 minutes earlier.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of the story of the little girl in the Natural History Museum and I forget the details of the story, but she comes to one place in the museum and the guy making the presentation says that, this, just for the sake of argument, this rock is 60 million years old. And the little girl raises her hand and says, how do you know that rock is 60 million years old? And he says, well, because of the layer that we found it in. Then they come around the museum and he's looking at a model of the layers, the geological layers. And he says that these represent these different, millions of years. And the same little girl raised her hand and says, how do you know that layer there is this many millions of years ago? And he says, well, because we found this rock in it and we know that this rock is, this many millions of years old. And she said, well, over there, you said you knew the rock was that old because of the layer you found it in. And over here, you're saying that, the layer's that old because of the rock you found in the layer. So, a little girl could figure out the circular reasoning, but, the so-called advanced scientists don't realize that they're even doing it.
Her father was a creationist, so
right.
The guy had a master's degree in geology, had no chance against her.
So the story and who it's about.
Well, it has to do with some fossils in certain layers and certain rocks and things of that nature. A few different, but yes, that story is in my lesson on cavemen and the fossil record.
Okay. All right. Well, I can tell from the audience reaction tonight that they would very much like for you to come back and do that and other presentations for us. And I hope you'll do that. I know I've really, really enjoyed having you on tonight. I'm going to have to say good night to you here, because as soon as I click this finish button, it's going to kick you out. So I won't get a chance to say goodnight to you after we go off the air. So I'll say it now. I've really enjoyed seeing you. It's been too long since I've got to spend some time with you and talk with you. And I've really, really enjoyed it. And I know that our audience would really enjoy you coming back and doing some more of your presentations. And I'll be getting in touch with you to schedule that as soon as possible.
Thank you for the opportunity, and God bless and good night.
Thank you.